Douglas County Courthouse, and those of you online to the February 8th Board of Douglas County Commissioners 5:30 business meeting. To get us started, I'm going to go over some information about public comment. Each action item on our agenda will offer the opportunity for relevant public comment about that topic. We ask that you wait till the agenda item you're here for comes up for discussion. If you're here to provide general public comment, that will be at the beginning of our meeting. This is a time for addressing issues not on today's agenda, but related to general county business. Public comment will be recorded and shared on the county's YouTube site to ensure compliance with YouTube's. Let me do that again. Public comment will not be recorded and shared on the county's YouTube site to ensure compliance with YouTube's content policies. To hear public comment, individuals can join us live here at the courthouse or on Zoom. We will first call on folks who are here in person, and then we'll turn to any online commenters who are here with us tonight. If you're on Zoom, please plan to use the raise your hand function when the time comes and listen for staff to call your name. All comments will be limited to 3 minutes, and we ask everyone to give their full name and Douglas County residence for our meeting minutes. All public comments should be directed to the County Commission. We also reserve the right to mute and remove any speaker who is vulgar, rude, or inappropriate. The public should know that the comments received by the Commission during our meetings do not represent the views of Douglas County government. If visual aids are used during the meeting, the presenter will share their screen. Please note that online participants will not be able to view them without a computer, smartphone, or tablet during tonight's meeting. Materials are published online for your reference also. Lastly, a recording of this meeting will be available on our YouTube page and on the website. Let's go over our agenda really quick. We have our consent agenda first. There are 6 items on that consent agenda. Then we'll do general public comment. If you would like to sign up for general public comment, there's a sheet here at the front. You can do that. We have a number of regular agenda items. First, we'll do personnel policies for Douglas County and Consolidated Fire District 1. Then Fairgrounds Maintenance Building Project. We have a CUP before us tonight about a tower, and we need to have an executive session with county counselor before that. We think that'll take about 15 minutes. So if you're trying to pace out the meeting for yourself, you might think about that. There's going to be a 15 minutes. Then we're going to talk about the tower. Then we're going to do the TRC update. And then we have an executive session after the TRC update. So as you're thinking about the meeting, just want to make sure everybody understands our schedule. Then we'll do appointments, commissioner, administrator, miscellaneous before we adjourn. With that, commissioners, is there any commissioner who would like to remove an item from the consent agenda for further discussion or questions? No? No? Any member of the public, a consent agenda item? Anyone online, Sarah? All right, I would entertain a motion for the consent agenda.
This is Commissioner Reed. I move to approve consent agenda items 1.1 through 1.6.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes 3-0. Now we'll move to general public comment. Is anyone here for general public comment? Regular agenda item is an update to personnel policies for Douglas County and Consolidated Fire District number 1.
Commissioners, Michelle Spear, our Director of Human Resources, is here. That's already on, so you can just talk right into it.
I haven't been in here since we have new equipment. Good evening. So just a very brief update. I know you've got bigger things to move on to. We've got several things on the agenda. I don't have a presentation as we put most everything in the agenda report. So our request, funeral leave for employees, moving that from 3 days to 5 days. I surveyed about 20 other employers, cities, counties, some other private employers close to us, and the average is about 5 days. So I felt like, our policy might be a little out of date. So that's one request. Most of the agenda item is about a new shared leave program that we would like to put into place. Currently, employees can, if they have a serious medical condition and they've used up all of their own time, sick time, vacation, etc., they can borrow up to 160 hours and they do pay that back. through, once they return to work, they do, their accruals then decrease and they're paying back that sick leave loan. If they're still in need after the loan, currently employees can solicit donations from other employees. Sometimes this can feel a little intrusive to employees that maybe want to keep their situation private. It is about their health or a family member's health. Some departments may help facilitate that process by emailing, saying, there's a coworker in need. Many departments do not. So I think having this shared leave pool where employees can donate, on an annual basis, we build up that balance. It would give those employees in need much more privacy. It's not so much of a popularity contest, so to speak. And employees would know that their hours that being donated to that pool are being taken care of. We would have a review process. The employee would have to document a need to use time from that pool. So it would not just be handed out, without a thorough review. So we would like to implement that policy as soon as possible and get rid of the asking for donations from other employees. So that's my quick overview. If you have questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Michelle?
I got the answer for this from Sarah, but if you can offer a clarification about why CFD1 is also listed here.
Okay, yeah. So I built the CFD policy when they came on board. I honestly had not kept that one as up to date. So these changes are in there, and there's also a few other changes in there that we updated to the Douglas County personnel policy on a consent agenda, last fall. Regarding discrimination and who to file a claim with and things like that. So it's just a little bit of cleanup of CFD, but a lot of their policies do mirror what we have here. They adopted most of ours when they came on board.
And that would be Consolidated Fire District 1. And
Yes.
all of those policies are included in the packet. If
Yes.
Anybody wants to read them?
Yes, both policies are in there, all 100 and some pages.
Any other questions, commissioners? Okay, thank you, Michelle. We'll open this up for public comment. Does anybody have public comment on this agenda item? Okay, anyone online? Okay, we'll bring it back up to commissioners for questions, discussions, or motions.
I will just make a comment that I appreciate that there's a real culture of always reviewing and checking our policies and how they might compare to other organizations like us. And so I just appreciate that due diligence and looking for ways to better serve employees through that. So I'd be happy to make a motion if
I just have a comment that I really appreciate, Michelle, what you said about not having to divulge why you're going to be gone to get some sick leave. And I think that can create an uncomfortable situation. This seems like a good update to me and happy to second after you make that motion, Commissioner Reed.
Commissioner Reed, I move to approve the changes to Douglas County and CFD1 personnel policies to include the addition of 2 more funeral days, changing the application period for the sick leave loan from 3 years to 2 years, and adding the shared leave pool policy.
Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Passes 3-0. Thank you.
Have a good night.
Next up is our fairground maintenance building project.
Thanks, commissioners. Jay Zimmershed, our Director of Capital Projects, and Jimmy Wilkins, our Director of Building and Grounds, are here to give us a brief update about this project that is included in your 2023 CIP. Jay?
Good evening, commissioners. I'll be brief. The project before you on this agenda item report is roughly a 5,000 square foot pre-engineered metal building to replace the current maintenance buildings that is 1960s vintage. As you can imagine, back in the 1960s, requirements were very different. There are no bathroom facilities, no dedicated places for welding, use of large tools and the things that they're using daily to maintain that equipment. And so this building is being proposed to replace that function. As Sarah mentioned, the building was on the CIP for 2023. We have currently worked with a consultant to this point to do some preliminary design work to get the dollar amounts and build the budget and the general project scope, which you can see there in your packets. The project would be competitively bid once designed through our bids and tenders online software. And then at that time, the project would be brought back before this commission for consideration for moving forward. I don't have a lot of additional information other than that. The project is really pretty simple, but very, very needed. And with that, I will stand for questions along with Jimmy Wilkins here, if you have any.
Yes, Commissioner Reed, I do have a quick question. I'm just curious what the plan is for the existing spaces that you're using. Are you, seems like they'll be no longer useful to you, or have you thought about a way to repurpose, or will that land just become open space at the fairgrounds?
Not sure that decision has fully been made yet. At this time, my thought would be with all the construction the county is looking at moving into the next 2 or 3 years with expansions, I'm sorry.
Thanks, sir.
With expansions of the law enforcement center and then work going on here, I could see some value in holding on to that building for storage and, that type of a use in the short term. But then in the long term, I would think there's a good chance that that building could be demolished and make more green space at the fairgrounds.
Thank you.
Yep.
So I had most of my questions answered when we were going through the CIP process about this and other things. But what kind of maintenance goes on? Is it anticipated to go on in the new building? Is this storage of equipment and maintenance of equipment? And is that mainly for the fairgrounds maintenance itself, or is that larger county purposes?
Mainly equipment maintenance will be done in this building. Like Jay was saying, the current building is not set up for welding and big compressors and things that people use these days to maintain that type of equipment. And there's just not space in the current building. So mainly taking care of mowers that we use both at the fairgrounds and across the county. The fairgrounds maintenance people do all the lawn care and all of the lawn maintenance for the entire county. And so they're not just at the fairgrounds. So all of that equipment then funnels back to the fairgrounds and is maintained there.
Thank you.
Jimmy and Jay, I know way more about storing of welding equipment than anyone should. Due to my school district job, I saw welding was included. Are you using TIG welding? Are you using any gas welding? There just wasn't any exterior storage for gas welding. So
No, it's all TIG.
all
welding.
TIG.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks. Just thinking safety there. Yeah, appreciate that. All right. Any other questions? Okay. Any public comment on this item? Anything online, Sarah? Okay. Commissioners, any further discussion or motions?
Their discussion, but happy to move to authorize the county administrator to enter into staff negotiated professional design service contracts with CT Design and Development and Land Plan Engineering in support of this project.
Second,
Been seconded. All those in favor say aye.
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 Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks, Al.
Appreciate it. Okay, at this point, I'll make a motion to go into executive session to consult with County Counselor John Bullock regarding matters that would be deemed privileged by attorney-client relationship, specifically regarding the conditional use permit for CUP 22-00409 for a communications tower at 727 East 1700 Road. I anticipate we'll be there for 15 minutes. I'll need a second for that.
Second.
Moved in. Oh, I should say the time. Thank you. So that'll be 6:05. We'll be back in session. Amended motion second.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, we are back in session after our executive session, and we are moving on to item 3.3, which is consideration of a conditional use permit, CUP 22-00409 for a communications tower at 727 East 1700 Road. And I believe Sandy Day is the planner.
Yep, Commissioner Sandy Day from Planning is in the panel. Go ahead, Sandy.
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. Sandy Day, Planning Office. If I may share my screen. Give me just a moment.
Be able to?
I believe so. Are you able to see my screen?
We are.
Okay. And are you seeing the presentation or the work page?
Well, we see your presentation in your next slide.
Okay.
Okay.
That's okay. Well, I apologize. I'm not sure exactly what's going on. I'm working from home this evening. The conditional use permit this evening that is being considered is wireless telecommunication facility at 727 East 1700 Road. It is located within the community of Vinland, and it is just on the north edge of the 3-mile limit with the city of Baldwin. So they were advised of the application and they did not have any comments and did not participate as it in a joint planning commission meeting for that. So this slide is just intended to give you an orientation of where this property is located. A little bit closer up of what the surrounding zoning land uses are. The property itself is zoned AG1, as is predominantly the property in the area. There are a number of AG2 zoned properties. The gold diamond highlights where there are existing residences, and then just to the southeast of the project within Vinland, there are a number of historic properties. There is also the Vinland Airfield within that proximity there. The character of the area is largely rural agricultural with scattered residential homes located along those county roads. And then Vinland, there are a number of properties that have been surveyed for historic content. They are not necessarily listed on historic registers, but they may be contributing properties. And then there are a few also properties that are on the National Register of Historic Places. The wireless facilities was updated. The code was updated in 2017. It requires some certain separation of wireless communication from other towers. There are compliance requirements with both state and federal regulations about how we view and regulate this kind of land use. There is an extraordinary notice boundary that is required to be forwarded to property owners within 1 mile. And this is greater than the normal half-mile boundary that is required to be noticed for conditional use permits. The conditional use permit process is a discretionary process. Planning Commission held that public hearing, and I'll summarize their actions in just a moment. And their recommendation comes to you as a governing body. The design of the pole is required in the code as a monopole design, and the proposed project complies with that. It also complies with this design standards to provide space for multiple carriers. The setback of the structure is measured by the height of the structure from the nearest property lines to the center line of the base, and the project also complies with that. At this time, the proposed project does not have specific lighting associated with it. It would have to comply with whatever requirements come down from FAA as the applicant moves through that regulatory review. Generally, towers under 200 feet do not have requirements to be lighting, although because of the proximity to the airport, there may or may not be requiring other kinds of lighting for this. One of the questions that came up, because we've been talking a lot about decommissioning plans in the regulations, there's not a specific provision about a decommissioning plan per se that is required with communication towers. They are required to be removed within a certain amount of time, but the application itself does not have to include a decommissioning plan, how it will be removed, how the foundation would be removed. This is a slide just to show the general proximity of the proposed tower in relationship to other towers in the general area, in the kind of that south central area of Douglas County. Most towers, the nearest one would be approximately 4 miles to the proposed tower, and that certainly far exceeds the minimum separation requirements of 1,000 feet. The design criteria for the project includes the monopole, as I mentioned, with the ability to have up to 3 carriers. The pole itself is roughly 180 feet. The lightning rod would add the overall height to that structure around 180 feet as proposed. Then you can see on the left hand of the slide, you can see where the applicant is proposing space for the immediate carrier AT&T, but then also space within the ground lease area for future carriers. At this time, we do not know who those would be. This is a photo simulation of what the structure would look like from 2 different views, and I'm sure the applicant can talk to you about that, but that is a requirement of the code as well to provide those photo simulations of what the structure would look like in the viewscape. Some of the other review criteria that we reviewed with the project were the compliance with the applicable provisions of the zoning regulations. There is a time limit associated with this use. In the staff report, you will see a recommendation that included a recommendation for approval subject to conditions, and that is reflected of what this time limit provision is, that there's maximum life to the project for 10 years with a renewal at 5 years. At that 10-year mark, the applicant would need to resubmit a new application for a special use permit. Compliance with the surrounding zoning and land use. As we see these kinds of uses, we see them in many different types of zoning districts, agricultural zoning districts, as well as industrial zoning districts are both appropriate for this kind of land use. Suitability to which the property has been restricted as a as a conditional use permit that does not change the underlying zoning of the property. And then there is no anticipated impact on transportation, community facilities, or utilities. And there is compliance with the comprehensive plan generally described in the staff report. Staff's recommendation for the project was for approval with the conditions that were listed in the staff report. The Planning Commission considered this item at their meeting January 23rd, and the commission forwarded a vote of 6-4 recommending denial of the application. There was no protest petition filed with this application. There is something that we call a shot clock, and that is set out by state and federal legislation that sets a bookend on the amount of time we have to review a particular project is 150 days. If the CUP is denied, there are certain steps that must be taken, provide written statement for the reasons for the denial based on specific evidence. And then if the commission does choose to vote for denial, then we would ask that you direct staff to prepare those findings and conclusions and bring them back to you at a subsequent meeting within that time frame. The application was submitted November 23rd of 2022, and our shot clock would run out around April 22nd. April 22nd of this year. The action items that you have before you this evening are to accept the Planning Commission's recommendation and deny the application, to return the conditional use permit back to the Planning Commission for further consideration, or you may approve the conditional use permit with conditions or modifications. There's no requirement at this time for any extraordinary vote, so a simple majority would carry any of these actions. I am happy to answer any questions. I believe the applicant was going to be online with you this evening. And that's all I have for you at the moment.
Thank you, Sandy. Commissioners, do you have any questions for Sandy before we hear from the applicant? Okay, we'll hear from the applicant.
Yeah, Sandy, I think we need, I don't know who the applicant is to move them into the panel.
Oh.
Do you know who's going to be here for them?
Y- uh, yes, just a moment.
Is it, Commissioner, this is Robin. Is it Jake Gain?
I think that's the correct name.
There, we'll get him moved over.
Okay, I'm sorry. I just momentarily drew a blank.
Jake? Jake, you're in the panel and you can unmute yourself.
Maybe Jake is not the applicant.
Hold on just a moment. We were trading some email back and forth. Bill Burbidge has been my lead.
We have
Uh,
Bill Burbidge.
Yeah, Bill has been my primary contact in this process. Yeah, and Jake Gain was the other presenter on this item.
Well, now he wants back in. All right.
I apologize for the confusion.
Hi, can everyone hear me? This is Bill Berberick.
We can.
Hi, Jake is having a hard time getting unmuted. Is there a way to bump him up to a panelist?
He is a panelist, so he just needs to unmute himself and he can speak.
Give us just 1 second with this technical difficulty. Okay, so Jake is having some technical difficulties, so I think I'm gonna be the lead here. Unfortunately, I did not have the PowerPoint that we are gonna go over loaded up to my computer today, so I will have no presentation at hand. Essentially, so we work for a company called Network Real Estate, and AT&T hired us to fill a gap in their coverage in the area of Inland. So the first thing we did was file a preliminary FAA study that told us where we should be able to or shouldn't be able to build, which led us to the Cleland family property. It was at the area that we found we get the most height with the tower. So we started to fill the applications, everything like that. We sorry, we feel like we meet the setbacks, and the FAA should allow us to build around 180 feet. We are here for questions if you need us. And yeah, I guess that's all I have for you.
Thank you, Bill. Commissioners, any questions for Bill? Not yet. Okay. So before I open this up for public comment, I'd like to ask our county counselor, John Bullock, to go over what is actually in the statute regarding this, because this has some very specific limitations for commissions when considering CUPs for wireless towers.
Thank you, Commissioner Kelly. John Bullock, County Counselor. In 2016, the Kansas legislature adopted KSA 66-2019. That's the citation of the statute, and it addresses the regulation of the placement of wireless infrastructure, and particularly exercise of authority by local governments with respect to the placement of those facilities. And the short version, commissioners, is that there are some very stringent limitations. Can you hear me all right? Sorry, Commissioner. Let me move this a little closer. There are some pretty stringent limitations on the ability of local government entities to regulate the placement and other aspects of the installation of wireless facilities. And the statute's quite lengthy. I won't read it to you, but I will provide what I think is a high level summary. And then if you want to dive deeper, just circle back with me. For example, and this was, I will mention, we did update the county zoning code in 2017 on the heels of this statute in the hopes of providing the commission with the maximum amount of latitude that would be legally permissible with respect to the regulation of these facilities. To illustrate the limitations on the government's authority, the statute states to ensure uniformity across the state with respect to consideration of every application, an authority shall not. And then I'll summarize. One of the things you cannot do is evaluate the applicant's business decisions with respect to the customer demand for the service or quality of service. You may not address or require information about the specific need for the wireless support structure, including if the service to be provided is to add additional wireless coverage. You can ask if they have done a study about that, but you can't ask to see it. Interestingly enough, you may not evaluate the application based on the availability of other potential locations. You may not dictate the type of transmission equipment or technology to be used. And this is one that I have a feeling will be of interest given the materials in the packet. You may not impose any restrictions at or near civilian airports with respect to objects in navigable airspace, height limitations, proximity to civilian airports, or markings and lighting on wireless support structures or base stations that are greater than or in conflict with any restrictions imposed by the Federal Aviation Administration. I'll circle back to that in just a minute. There are also prohibitions on this government attempting to regulate on radio frequency signal strength, imposing surety requirements for bonds for decommissioning unless they are imposed similarly on other projects and developments. You may not discriminate on the basis of the ownership type of any property. You may not impose unreasonable requirements or obligations regarding the presentation, appearance, or function of the wireless facilities and equipment. I'm skipping some just in the interest of time, but you may not impose environmental testing, sampling, or monitoring requirements that exceed federal law. You may not reject an application in whole or in part based on perceived or alleged environmental effects of radio frequency emissions or exposures. You may not impose a greater setback or fall zone requirement than for other types of commercial structures of a similar size. And you may not limit the duration of the approval for less than 10 years. Now, I'd like to circle back just briefly on the topic of proximity to civilian airports and requiring compliance that is greater than or in conflict with restrictions imposed by the Federal Aviation Administration. I don't purport to be an expert on Federal Aviation Administration laws. I did look at some regulations today. It may be that the FAA will be asked to issue a no hazard letter with respect to this facility. I can't say that for sure. And if the commission would like to direct me to do more work on the FAA restrictions, because you may not impose restrictions that are greater than those, but you may impose restrictions that are coextensive with those. It may be that the FAA will determine that for you. I'm not sure of the status of this particular project before the FAA, so I put that out there. I would mention that despite the extensive limitations that are in the statute, there is some latitude for the county to provide regulatory oversight, and a lot of that is embodied in our code already. It's also permissible for the commission to consider whether the placement of the tower is suitable for the character of the area. But I would caution you respectfully that your suitability determination may not be based on any of the prohibited characteristics that we've already discussed. And as Sandy mentioned in her report, if you do a vote to deny this application, we would need to provide written explanation for the reasons in writing, citing evidence that is before you. And so my request would be is if that is your decision, that please help us understand through your comments and decision-making process those reasons so that we can incorporate those into formal findings. I'd be happy to take any questions. Obviously, this is just a partial summary of the law in this area, but it's intended to illustrate that your latitude is fairly restricted due to the existence of this statute, which we're bound to follow by state law.
John, appreciate that. Commissioners, any questions for John? Okay, so we'll open this up for public comment. Is anybody here to provide public comment on this item? Come on up. You'll have 3 minutes to provide the commission your public comment.
My name is Sharon Vasetsky. I live at 1814 North 600 Road, which is approximately a mile south and a half a mile east of the proposed site for this tower. I was elated when I heard that there was a possibility of this tower being erected because cell phone service at my house is totally unreliable. It doesn't matter if I'm in the house, in the yard, or on the road out in front of my house. My cell phone will not work there because I live in a dead zone. It's not unusual for text messages that I should receive in the evening to show up on my phone as I approach Baldwin from the north in the morning. This morning I had 3 messages and I should have had them last night. Now, if we are coming to Lawrence on County Road 1055, John's driving, I want to make a phone call or send a text message. There's no point in even trying until I get to County Road 458. This summer, I had car trouble on 59 Highway, about 3/4 of a mile south of Wells Overlook Park. I could not call for somebody to come get me. My cell phone would not work. And after trying several things, I decided to call 911, and I did get a very staticky conversation with the dispatch person who contacted the sheriff's deputy, and she managed to get them to call my daughter to come get me. Now, one of my additional concerns is Vinland itself. There's no cell phone coverage there. And if someone had an emergency similar to mine, they wouldn't be able to call. And then what happens if somebody has an emergency at the Vinland Fair? We have no cell phone coverage. Thank you.
I'm John Vasetsky, and I've got a cell phone, but I don't even carry it at the house. It just wait in my pocket. You know, I do take it with me when I go to the field in case I need it. And if I'm on top of a hill, it might work. But if I'm down in a low area, I better start walking because I probably won't have any coverage. So I'm ready for some cell phone coverage. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment on this item?
Good evening, commissioners, and thank you for your work on this project. Thank you also to Sandy Day for your work on this project. My name is PJ Adams. I own the property at 682 East 1719 Road, which is in the village of Vinland. And with respect to my neighbors, the Vasetskis, I have a cell phone also. I live in Vinland. I don't have a problem getting cell phone calls. I can call out, I can receive calls. It's not an issue for me. What I have noticed is that in the interior of the village, there are pockets that are known as urban canyons where the buildings are configured in such a way that transmission waves are not able to bend around corners. And it is difficult in certain areas within the environs of the village to communicate with a cell phone. My house happens to be on the very outskirts, the very south end. I don't have cell phone problems. I don't have text message problems either. So it's kind of a question of whether it's a blanket concern for everyone with cell phones. One thing that I would like to address is I am here to represent the historic environs of Vinland, and my concerns I am echoing with other neighbors who live in Vinland that we have worked very hard to maintain the integrity of that community. It is a historic asset to Douglas County. And we've spent a lot of time and a lot of money trying to maintain the historical appearance and the viewscape of that village. Years ago, when McFarland Aviation wanted to expand, we were able to work directly with the owner of McFarland Aviation to limit the light pollution into the village and to design the structures that they needed in such a way, thank you, that the concerns of the villagers were addressed. One other point I'd like to make is that Mr. Berberich pointed out that the Cleveland land was the optimal land for placement of a cell tower. I do know for a fact that the locating company contacted other neighbors within the area, proposing to them that their land be used. One of these neighbors opted to not accept the proposal because they were going to be paid $800 a month for the space on their land for this tower to exist. So thank you, commissioners. Please keep in mind the historic environs of Vinland. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any other public comment here at the courthouse? We'll turn to online. Sarah? No one online. All right. We'll close public comment. This is a planning item, so we typically give the applicant time to respond to some of the public comments, and we'll do that now. Bill, do you have any comments based? Jake is now unmuted. Oh, and he's back to muted. There's Jake.
All right, can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I apologize for the technical difficulties here. As Bill stated earlier, we do have a presentation, but I can answer questions first. The presentation does incorporate some of the proprietary information of why we are here. I know that the state statute does not require it, but again, we have approval to do so if needed to state our case. I do know I can answer one of the questions of the last person that spoke for the public in terms of the historical preservation of Vinland. The NEPA document, which is the National Environmental Policy Act, is this very large federally regulated document that goes through all of these different avenues, whether it be the FCC, FAA, the State Historical Preservation Office, things like that. And we actually just got that NEPA document last week, and we have approval from the State Historical Preservation Office for this tower. If we have to provide that document, we would be more than willing to do so. But again, that's just another reason or avenue that we had to go through from a federal standpoint to in the filing of this proposed tower. So that would be in regards to that. If you guys want me to go through the presentation within the next couple of minutes, I'd be more than willing to do so. I think it would help, but if you guys don't need to and it doesn't have any bearing, that's up to you guys. Or if you guys have any questions directly for me or Bill, we can answer those too.
Thank you, Jake. Appreciate it. Commissioners, do we want to see the presentation? I know it was in our packet, so just want to check in.
It was both in our packet and I watched it with the planning commission meeting, so I'm comfortable with whatever the chair decides.
Yeah, I think it's fine to forgo the presentation, Jake. I also watched the planning commission meeting, so thank you for that.
All right, absolutely.
Questions, commissioners, comments, thoughts?
Would just look to John and say, can I summarize it this way? Would this be correct that the state really has tied our hands on cell tower locations and all the things we would care to consider with it, and violation kind of home rule, that we do not have a lot of say over these, and that's pretty unusual compared to other conditional use permits would that be all correct?
Commissioner, the state's enactment of the statute does supersede any home rule type authority with respect to this. The limitations that I described are extensive, and they're even more beyond the ones that I did describe. We've tried to incorporate the latitude that the commission has into the code. And so whatever latitude you have is there, with the proviso that if you determine that it was unsuitable for this particular area based on other criteria, whatever they might be, then you'd have that opportunity. But it would be, I think, accurate to say that your room to maneuver here is fairly circumscribed by the statute.
I have a question for Sandy. So of the three options you gave us in your presentation, one is to change any conditions or modifications with this CUP. There aren't really very many that we could possibly offer for this that would also fall legally within the statute. Is that correct? Or did you have any particular ones in mind?
Yes. Sandy Day, Planning Office. No, I did not have any specific suggested language for you. I just merely put it out there as one of your options. And yes, it's correct that that your options are very limited.
Another question, Sandy, if I may. So this is the conditional use permit for it's a 10-year permit with a 5-year review. What authority do we have to either review it or offer any additional changes after the 10-year mark? Any?
Sandy Day, Planning. That's a very good question. I think the review would look at making sure that the site is functioning as it has been approved. Things like storing of equipment or materials at the base of the tower, those kinds of things. It's not something I expect, but that would be something that could possibly happen. And I think we would have the ability to ask the applicant to either, we work with applicants to try to bring them into compliance. So if somebody were using that space for, say, storage of equipment, then we would work with them to try and get that cleaned up, and so that would not be an issue. So that could be something that would pop up during a review.
Okay, one last one, and then I'll let other commissioners chime in. On number 17 in the statutes, it says that we can't be any more restrictive in fall zones than we do in other towers or other similar structures. Do we have regulations that cover other towers or similar structures and their fall zones? Is it 100% of the tower height, or is it something else?
This is really kind of the only land use where we talk about a fall zone. We may be talking about it in another type of land use that would be coming forward at some point in time. But it is pretty typical to look at structures being set back equal to the distance of their height, with the exception of typical buildings. So an example would be a residence. You can have a closer setback for residents in some situations to a particular property line. That would maybe be less than the height of the structure.
Thank you, Sandy.
My question is Commissioner Kelly. My question is for Jake or Bill. You mentioned the state historical approval, and there was much discussion at the Planning Commission about FAA approval. What is it that you're hoping to get from the FAA? What specifically, is it the same type of document?
So the FAA is actually a separate document, but it's still handled by the same regulatory agency that puts the packet together. Now, the FAA approval is not in the NEPA document. That comes directly from the FAA on their own. Now, one thing that we did discuss at the planning and zoning hearing is when we got this searching for this area, we obviously did our homework and understood that there was a nearby airport. So we did what's called a preliminary airspace study based on the height that AT&T wanted to achieve here for their network, which was originally 250 foot tall. Once we did that preliminary airspace study, Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, they came back with what we chose for our height of our tower here at the 180. So that was, you know, when we do the preliminary airspace study, it does go through the FAA. Now, it is not a full FAA approval, but that's just based on their preliminary look before they go into more depth. Now, when we did have this location and we had a lease on the property, we did submit all the documentation to the FAA for this. Now, the NEPA document just happened to come in before the FAA approval, but we did have some communication with them actually today. There's 2 steps within the FAA approval. It has passed through the first one, and the second one should be within the next month and a half. Now, with that said, the FAA could come back and say, hey, you're good at the height that you have. They could come back and say you need to lower it 5 feet, 10 feet. You know, they could come back and say, hey, you're good at the height that you have, and you could get, you know, 15 feet more. They're really the agency that's going to say yes or no, or on what height that we can get here. And I know Sandy touched on it earlier during her presentation. In terms of the lighting, you know, towers under 200 feet do not require to be lit, but we have had towers before in the past that are less than 200 feet and near an airport where the FAA did require specific lighting. So in short, once we get the FAA back, they will give us the height that we are allowed to be at.
Hey, Jake, you gave me a lot of information. My question was, is there a document that they give you?
Yes.
And what's that called?
I believe it's just called the FAA approval document. I
Okay,
can
thank you.
actually let me look it up real quick here. I'm almost positive that's what it's called. Sorry, it is an FAA approval document, but it's technically called the determination of no hazard.
Right.
So it's an FAA determination of no hazard document.
And Jake, can you say again, when do you anticipate having that document?
Well, it could change, but forecast within by the end of March, I believe. It really depends on how busy they are and what their priority is, but based on the information that we just got today from the regulatory agency, that was kind of the forecast.
Any other questions, commissioners, comments? So I want to say one thing. First, I appreciate those folks who have come out and shared with us their thoughts about this request. And I did watch the Planning Commission, and there were quite a few more there, and we did get some letters on this, and I appreciate it. This is one of those times where, as a local government agency, you really feel your hands are tied. There are limits to what you can do based on state statute. I want to make sure that you hear that you were heard. But there are limitations to what we're able to do based on the statute, and we have to be cognizant of that. I do think there are some things, some conditions, commissioners, that I would like to add, and I'd like to get your sense here. I think I'd like to add a condition that they will provide the state historical improvement documentation. And the second one is that we get the FAA termination of no hazard letter. Those are the two that I feel like 2 conditions that we could add if we choose to approve this. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Mr. Chair, is the NIFA document separate from the State Historic Resources document? And is that something you'd also like to include?
I'd be happy to include that as well. I thought they were in the same document, but maybe I was mistaken.
Jake, do you mind giving some clarification? Is that one document?
Yes, the State Historical Preservation Office is in the NEPA document, but the FAA document for no determination of hazard or whatever that height would be is a separate document.
And is the NEPA document the same as the state historic document?
Yes, the State Historic Preservation Office document will be inside of that NEPA document.
Yeah. So it's the NEPA, I guess.
Correct.
This is Commissioner Reed, I like both of those conditions, and I appreciate your comments, Commissioner Kelly, about the the position we're in with this very particular request, which varies quite a bit from how other conditional use permits are discussed and investigated maybe further, so.
John, do you mind if I ask you to again read us in its entirety, point number 6, just since we've had representatives from the McFarland Aviation business that have just come in, and I want to make sure that we cover why we're able to talk about what we do and other things that we are not.
Yes, Commissioner, as mentioned previously, the statute states that the authority, that means this governmental authority, shall not, in point 6, impose any restrictions at or near civilian airports with respect to objects in navigable airspace height limitations, proximity to civilian airports, or markings and lighting on wireless support structures or base stations that are greater than or in conflict with any restrictions imposed by the Federal Aviation Administration.
Thank you for reading that. One of many things that we are not allowed to consider by state statute for this particular kind of CUP for cell towers.
I'll make a motion to approve a conditional use permit for a new 190-foot tall wireless communications facility located at 727 East 1700 Road, with the conditions listed and adding 2 additional conditions. The first additional condition is that zoning and planning receives the NEPA documentation with its state historical approval letter. And the second additional is that zoning and planning receives the FAA termination of no hazard letter.
Commissioner Kelly, I'm sorry to
Please,
interject.
yes, I'm doing my best.
In the motion, I believe you stated that the height of the tower would be 185 feet. Is that right?
What we have in our, I can amend it. What we have in our packet is 190 foot.
190 foot. And so I guess my question is, I think I heard the applicant
Say
reference-
185, yes.
And also, I was also, he may have indicated that the FAA will determine how tall the tower is. And so my question, I guess, is, does the applicant agree that the maximum height would be 190 feet? That way the motion would be appropriate as phrased.
Jake, did you
Yes.
get that question?
Yes, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, that would be correct. We obviously wouldn't have proposed this if we didn't have the height approval for AT&T where it would work for the network. So yes to the question. It would not go above that height if for whatever reason FAA came back and said we could get more. So it would stay here or below.
So is that number 190 or 185?
The 185.
185. Okay, I'll amend my motion to say the height of the tower is 185 feet tall.
Mr. Chair, do you mean not to exceed 185? Should the FAA decide something different?
Well, because we can't tell the FAA what to do, I'm just going to say 185. I mean, I don't think we can, if the FAA says that can go up to 200, we can't say anything about it. So
If the FAA says 180, do we need a new motion? That's my point.
oh,
Yeah, not to exceed.
So I'll amend my motion to not exceed 185 feet. And leave it there.
I'll second.
Before we vote, may I?
Mhm.
Just say I personally do know that there is a significant dead zone as you head north out of Baldwin through Vinland and north from there. There is a great need for coverage in the area. I also am really sensitive to not only the comments we heard here, but the more extensive comments that we heard at the Planning Commission about the historical beauty of Vinland, and the Vinland Library is one of our older settlement monuments there. So I just want to recognize that this is one of those times where we would have been talking about that if we had the latitude to do so. With that, I'm ready to vote.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Passes 3-0. Thank you, Sandy. Thank you, John. Okay, we will move on to an update on the Treatment and Recovery Center. And this, I believe, will start with Sarah.
Thank you, commissioners. We are prepared to provide an update on the Treatment and Recovery Center. We've prepared a few slides for staff to review with you. So I'm going to go ahead and pull those up and share my screen on the slides. Right. All right. Thank you, commissioners. Appreciate this opportunity to provide a little more information about where we're at on the status of our review of the materials related to the operations of the Treatment and Recovery Center. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to John Bullock, who's going to introduce other members of our team, and we'll get started. John?
Is this on? Okay. Sarah, may I have the next slide, please? Commissioners, John Bullock, County Counselor. As Sarah mentioned, this is an update regarding the status of discussions between Douglas County and Burt Nash Community Mental Health Center for possible operation and leasing of the county's Treatment and Recovery Center. No decisions have been made. As you are well aware, I want you to understand that no agreements have been reached. The ultimate decision will be made by the Board of County Commissioners at a public meeting at some time in the future. Tonight's presentation will highlight three main topics: due diligence, key terms for a possible operating agreement and lease, and a timeline. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, the first part of our presentation will be to discuss the county's due diligence regarding Burt Nash's preparation and readiness to operate the TRC in accordance with the needs and expectations of the public and the County Commission. While I have some healthcare experience, it is not my primary area of expertise. Therefore, in August 2022, the county retained outside counsel to help us with this project. And therefore, it is my pleasure this evening to introduce you publicly to Brooke Azier. Brooke is here in the commission room and will lead the due diligence part of our presentation. She'll generally be available also to assist with any questions or topics you may wish to discuss with her. Brooke is a partner with the law firm of Folston Siefken. Folston is a Kansas-based law firm that was founded in 1919. Folston has offices in Wichita, Topeka, and the Kansas City area. Brooke is a graduate of the University of Kansas Law School, where she was articles editor of the Law Review and a member of Order of the Coif, which represents the highest level of academic achievement. She received her undergraduate degree with highest honors from Friends University. Brooke is a recognized expert in healthcare law. She is a frequent lecturer on healthcare law topics, as well as a member of the American Health Law Association, the Kansas Association of Hospital Attorneys, and the Greater Kansas City Society of Healthcare Attorneys. Brooke is named in the Best Lawyers in America for Healthcare Law and was selected for the Missouri and Kansas Super Lawyers Rising Stars list. In her extensive healthcare work, Brooke has represented hospitals, ambulatory surgery centers, physician groups, skilled nursing facilities, recovery care centers, home health agencies, durable medical equipment suppliers, third-party billing companies, physicians, nurses, and numerous medical groups. She has assisted providers with Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement, negotiating managed care and other payer contracts, drafting and implementing compliance programs, advising clients on licensure and the Medicare conditions of participation and conditions for coverage, and EMTALA compliance. She has assisted Medicaid home and community-based service providers with licensure and regulatory issues. There is even more I could say about Brooke's background and expertise, but that should give you a sense for her background and why back in August of 2022, we asked Brooke to get involved in helping to advise us on this project. With that, commissioners, and with your permission, I'd like to turn it over to Brooke to lead the due diligence portion of our presentation.
Right. Good evening. Can you hear me okay? Okay. A little shorter than John. We thought it would be helpful to start with a general overview of the due diligence process. So that way we're all starting from the same place when we talk about the TRC specific project. So the first topic we'd like to cover is, what is due diligence actually? And it's a routine process that parties use in business transactions in order to exchange information, to get a better understanding of, can we reach an agreement? Basically, can we agree on, what each party is going to deliver as part of the transaction? And so this process is intended to be a non-adversarial process. It's really an exchange of information so that we can figure out, can we get to a point where we can reach an agreement? So why do we perform due diligence? Why is it important? I think it's important for several reasons. The first one being, it's important to make well-informed decisions, and you can't do that if you do not have all the information and all the facts with respect to a potential arrangement with a business partner. It can also help, in my experience, it can help the parties focus on what's important, what issues are important, what's not so important. And in my practice, for me, the biggest, pro with respect to doing due diligence, it's an important tool that can actually get the parties to an agreement. You can't reach an agreement if you don't have all the information and you don't have all the facts. So as far as the process that we utilize in the due diligence process, it's as I alluded to, it's an exchange of information, an exchange of documents. That can be through face-to-face meetings where one party asks another party a question. It can be through a written process where a list of specific documents or questions is submitted to the other party. And then typically this process can kind of vary on the length of time. I've had situations where my client was anxious to get a deal done, so it took 30 days to get through the due diligence process. And I've had other situations where it's been closer to 90 days to get through that process, which is probably more typical in business transactions, is that due diligence process would take 90 days. So with respect to the TRC, moving to our second topic, I'll just kind of describe the approach I took with respect to meeting with the county staff. With clients before we engage in the due diligence process with the other party, I first meet with the client to figure out, okay, what is important? What isn't important? In my experience as a healthcare lawyer, I found with working with clients, not every item in a due diligence project is a legal question. It's not always a legal issue. It comes down to what's important to the client and what's important to the client's mission. So we start there. And what I found, excuse me, in meeting with the Douglas County staff, is that the TRC is much more than just a building to the county. It represents a multi-year commitment and mission to bring needed behavioral health crisis centers to Douglas County. And in this county, the county's mission, I also learned, was just based on this mandate from the public through you all as elected officials, plus all the public advocacy that went into building the TRC. as well as the sales tax vote of, the citizens of Douglas County voting to build the TRC. So with this mission, with this commitment and mandate, it makes good sense for the county to ensure that any operator they choose for their TRC is ready, willing, and able to deliver those services that the public is requesting as part of the mandate to build the TRC. And working with the county staff, another issue with respect to the mandate was, the fact that, this isn't a situation where the space is there and the operator is going to come in. There's going to be an ongoing funding obligation of support from the county for the TRC. And I think this county staff also recognize that, given the public mandate to build the TRC and operate this TRC, the public is going to be looking to the county, not necessarily the operator, to make sure it's operating based on the mandate of the citizens of this county. So for all of these reasons, the county really has to be more than just an owner of a building, more than a landlord. It requires a structured operating agreement with objectives, performance metrics, and deliverables. Now, it's important to understand that these deliverables may be more extensive than what the state may require to give an operator a license. And that is okay. And that is completely normal in a business transaction. I have yet to be involved in any kind of transaction in my practice, whether I was representing the landlord or operator or management company, that a license was sufficient to get the deal done. There's always something, it's license plus. And it's up to, in this situation, the county as the owner and investor in the mission and financially to figure out what that plus is. So, based on all of this background, this work that I did with the county staff, we felt it was completely reasonable to ask questions of the proposed operator, to ask for clarifications, to ask for policies, to ask for workflows, to make sure those items aligned with the county and its citizens' expectations. So, and to address the specific process that we went through with Burton Nash, that's the process, that's how we approached it. Burton Nash provided a lot of documentation on December 14th, lots of materials. They were organized in, folder fashion based on a series of different topics, anything from license to insurance to policies. And it was very helpful, that information that was provided. We didn't get a whole lot of explanation how certain items applied to various operations with respect to the TRC. And so the county staff and I worked to review those materials and to see how they aligned, with the county's expectations on a variety of topics related to service delivery, staffing, equal access to the TRC so that all citizens that need those types of services can get them, as well as hours of operation and other topics. It's important to understand that this process that the county staff and I have been going through, it involves more than just ensuring that there's a license in place to operate. As I said before, it's license plus, and that's what we're going through and what we're trying to figure out what that plus is. So as part of this review process, we identified areas of needed clarification, questions, and we presented those to Burnt Nash in an initial response on January 20. And we supplemented that response on February 2nd. We also had a meeting with county staff and Burnt Nash to give Burnt Nash an opportunity to ask the county and its staff clarification questions with respect to our initial and supplemental responses. And now, Sarah, you can move to the next slide. So this slide provides an overview of the topics that were covered in the initial response to Burnt Nash as well as the supplemental response. I won't go through and read that for you. You can see that there's 17 different topics on that list. And these were all areas that staff identified and needing additional clarification, additional information. Since our meeting and providing these memos to Burnt Nash, we have received clarification on some items. For example, we received confirmation from Burnt Nash on Friday, February 3rd, that they have a provisional license in Burnt Nash's name to operate the TRC. We also received additional materials on February 7th, so that would have been yesterday around lunchtime. Due to the timing with respect to this meeting, county staff and I have not had an opportunity to review all of those materials and discuss at a kind of a high level to let you know what we did receive. We received additional documents for review, and we also received a written response from Burnt Nash. And it's clear from that written response that Burnt Nash made an effort to respond to each of those 17 areas that were in our initial response that we provided to them on January 20. So I think that is helpful, and the timing with respect to this meeting, this meeting tonight, I think may have spurred Burnt Nash providing us with those materials. But regardless of how we got them, I think it shows that this due diligence process is working. The parties are communicating, we are talking, we are sharing information, we are getting clarification. And that's what business transactions are all about, and getting to the ultimate signing of the document. Could you go to the next slide, Sarah? So as far as kind of the status of due diligence, I would say it's ongoing at this point. We have a very aggressive timeline for completing the due diligence process, and that's March 10th. So we don't have a lot of time. We've got about a month to continue with our discussions and sharing information. But I can tell you from my standpoint and the county standpoint and everything, I think in the recent communications from Burnt Nash is that, we're all willing to put the work in to get access to that information. So I will continue to work with the county staff. We will review what Burnt Nash provided to us yesterday. And I expect that some questions will be answered and we'll be able to cross those things off our list. I expect that we're going to have additional questions. And, in the written response, there were 2 or 3 responses to the 17 categories where Burnt Nash said, hey, let's have a meeting and discuss that particular item. So I expect that we'll be having additional meetings with Burnt Nash to discuss those items. We actually do have a meeting scheduled with Burnt Nash, our next meeting scheduled for February 14th. So it's possible that some of those items in their response that we received yesterday will be discussed at that meeting. So that is, I guess, my update. I will just pause now to see if you have any questions for me.
Any questions from Brooke, commissioners? No. Brooke, I just had one question. You mentioned that this is a process you have done before with other organizations. Are you at liberty to share what some of those organizations are? Just for context.
Sure. I can't provide client names, but this is a process. I work with, for example, management companies that manage ambulatory surgery centers and hospitals. So they would actually be the kind of on the operator side. And so I've helped them pull the information together to respond to the owner's, requests for due diligence. In my representation of long-term care facilities, it's quite common. I serve as local counsel. A lot of, outside companies will come in to purchase a long-term care facility. So I help them, facilitate the due diligence process for, asking for information. No deal's the same. So, in some situations, we're very concerned about payer contracts and, will the new owner be able to, get that transferred over? And others are more concerned about bed capacity. Does that help? Or I could try to give you some additional ones.
No, and I guess my second question sort of following up, is it uncommon for an operator to be frustrated with some of the expectations from the partner they're negotiating with?
When I said it's a non-adversarial process, I mean it. In my experience, most people coming to the table, if I'm wanting to operate or manage a facility, I'm going to anticipate that the person I'm trying to ink the agreement with is going to make me provide some information. And that may be, I mean, and depending on the deal, that could be a lot of information and that could be not much. And so I could see, in some situations, perhaps, an operator might think, you're being too onerous. I sold a nursing facility one time where it really had no assets. There was very little value. So, it was like a $25,000 deal. But the buyer just made us just spend hours and hours and hours on due diligence. And of course, my client was like, this is really extreme. They're only paying us $25,000 for this. Why do we have to go through it? But I don't think anything that the county's asked for in this situation is unreasonable. Especially when we're talking about the type of investment with the TRC and the fact that this is kind of a new space for everybody. I mean, my understanding that we get this thing off the ground, it's going to be the first one in the state, and KDAS is going to be looking to the TRC to model other similar facilities throughout the state.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brooke and commissioners. As I mentioned at the beginning, there are three parts to this. That was the due diligence piece. I'm going to speak a little bit about the key terms for the operating agreement and lease. And at the end, Sarah will review in more detail than Brooke did the actual timeline. And on that subject, I will say we have proposed what we consider to be a pretty brisk timeline to get this process completed so that you'll have an opportunity to make your decision sooner rather than later. And my understanding is that, as we've shared this timeline with Burt Nash, they've stated that they believe that's achievable and they're willing to try to meet those time deadlines. And yet while we are engaged in the due diligence process that we just discussed, it's also important to find out whether the county and Burt Nash can reach agreement concerning the operation of the TRC. And from a legal perspective, we envision two potential agreements between the county and the operator of the facility: an operating agreement and a lease. As I mentioned in my preliminary comments, nothing has been agreed to at this point. Any decision will have to come back to you on behalf of the county and to the leadership of Burt Nash on behalf of Burt Nash, of course. We recognize that the commission is motivated to see the center and open and operate successfully. And therefore, rather than complete the due diligence process first and then turn to the agreements regarding business terms for operation of the facility, we've started a conversation about key business terms on a parallel track with the due diligence process. And again, as we'll get into in the third portion, we'll have a discussion of the timeline. The idea of this is to see if we can get to a meeting of the minds concerning, and that's a phrase we lawyers use to say that we're going to get into a contract, concerning the key elements of how Burt Nash would operate the center. If we can get to agreement, then we would come back to you and let you know that staff for the county and Burt Nash have reached agreement in principle, and then ask whether you would like to proceed along those lines or perhaps do something different. Then we can proceed with the lawyers and staff to develop definitive agreements for approval by this body and the Burt Nash leadership. If we're not able, despite these efforts, to get to an agreement in principle, we would come back to you and report that as well. The goal, frankly, is to find out as quickly as possible, but also responsibly, whether Burt Nash will agree to operate the center according to the needs and expectations of county leadership. With that in mind, I've prepared this slide with a summary of the key business terms that are under discussion. We introduced these terms to Burt Nash staff on January 26th. Burt Nash has not provided a substantive response to the possible terms at this point. However, there have been conversations and discussions regarding the scope of services that Burt Nash might offer at the TRC, as well as some discussions of funding and some other matters that are listed on the slide. These discussions are expected to continue. In the timeline, we have projected that we would like to get to agreement on the key business terms by February 23rd, and this date expectation has been communicated to Burt Nash leadership. And the point is not to nail down literally everything by that point in time, but just to see if we can reach agreement on the key terms. Now, as you can see from this slide, with respect to the operating agreement, we are discussing the term or length of the agreement. the services that will be provided, such as what services, on what timeline, for which types of patients, staffing of the TRC, funding that would include county funding, potentially state funding, other sources of revenue, data and reporting, and this could relate to the services provided, wait times, quality and quantity of services, quality metrics, that sort of thing. Accreditation, and we've actually discussed this at some length with Bert Nash, and this one may be fairly close to being closed out. A grievance procedure for complaints or issues related to TRC services, a TRC advisory council, and this would be, in theory, a council created by the county commission to advise on behavioral health and substance use issues, including but not limited to TRC operations. Other terms and conditions, just as a placeholder for things that people come up with that we haven't thought of that need to be on this term discussion. And then finally, we've just included a request for proposal item, and this refers to the possibility that after a specific time of operations, the county commission might decide to issue an RFP for continued operations of the center. As I say, this is more of a placeholder than necessarily a decision point or a commitment that the county would be making at this time. As I mentioned, the county and Bert Nash are engaged in discussions around these points. We have established the timeline in which we will find out if agreement is possible, and if so, then we would come back to you for a decision. As for the lease, and I think we just turn to the next slide, please. The process would be similar. We have introduced some proposed key lease terms. These were shared with Bert Nash on January 26th. We've not received a substantive response to those proposed terms yet, so we do look forward to hearing more from Bert Nash about those key terms, and those discussions are open and ongoing. To conclude, commissioners, the county and Bert Nash are actively engaged in discussion of these key business terms. Nothing to decide tonight, but my assumption is that Sarah would schedule a further public update at the appropriate time. Be happy to receive any questions or turn it back over to Sarah for the timeline discussion.
Questions for John, commissioners? Nope.
All right, thank you, commissioners. As John and Brooke alluded to, we prepared a timeline because I know it is the commission's desire that we move briskly through this process as expediently as possible to get the center open as quickly and as safely as possible. So this first slide goes through kind of what's happened to date. On December 14th, we were provided a set of documents. On January 20th, following the analysis of that, the county provided that review and some questions back to Bert Nash. 6 days later, we introduced those key terms and sent that to Bert Nash. On the 31st, we had our first meeting to talk about the questions and clarifications relating to the due diligence request process. On February 2nd, the county provided a supplemental due diligence policy review piece to Bert Nash. And on February 3rd, we were asking for feedback that we could present at this meeting. If there was anything we needed for this meeting, it was there sort of the date we were hoping to have set. We had another meeting with the county and Bert Nash and KDAD to discuss the TRC on Monday. Yesterday at noon, we received supplemental information from the county regarding this due diligence review. And then here we are tonight to have this update related to where we're at in the process. Moving forward, as John and Brooke mentioned, we have a meeting scheduled for the 14th. We have sort of, and this time I want to be clear, I've shared this timeline with Patrick Schmitz with Bert Nash. This has been something that we've discussed. No date on this timeline is something that Patrick has not seen, and Patrick has agreed that this is the process that we're going to use moving forward. I also want to be really clear as we start talking about future dates. This is an extremely aggressive timeline. This is going to require multiple meetings a week, perhaps, on the part of county staff and Bert Nash staff to get moving towards this timeline. I think from the direction I have from the county commission was to set an aggressive timeline. But I think it is important to know that we're going to have to work real hard to make some of these things happen. So the deadline for us to come to agreement on those key terms would be February 23rd. March 10th would be our deadline to have everything satisfactorily answered on the due diligence questions and requests. If and that's sort of the time frame we're allowing to go through this process of due diligence. I think it's fully likely that at that time after that, we would come back to the commission with the information as to how that due diligence review was completed. Placeholder for that public update. Commissioners, we tentatively scheduled to be off on March 15th. So I highly think that our placeholder for that next public update would be the 22nd. And then we've set a deadline for ourselves for an operating and lease agreement in final form by all parties on March 31st. That means this could be presented for county commission approval on April 5th. Again, no agreements have been reached. I really appreciate the hard work that everybody has put into this process to get us this far, both on the part of Burt Nash staff and on the part of county staff and resources to help us get this far. And I feel pretty confident that this is a deadline that we can meet, assuming we all keep working as hard as we've been working. So with that, commissioners, that is all I have in our presentation. And we stand for questions, or commissioners can decide how they want to handle the rest of the update. I know Patrick Schmitz is here from Burt Nash and is prepared to answer some questions as well.
Commissioner, do you have any questions for Sarah on that timeline? Not yet. Okay. So Patrick, I want to offer an opportunity for you to come and share with us whatever you might like to share with us.
Thank you, commissioners and Douglas County staff for the opportunity to participate in this update to our community on the progress and status toward opening the Treatment and Recovery Center. It is my distinct honor to represent the Burt Nash Center team in our efforts to partner with Douglas County on opening this vital community service. We tremendously appreciate the opportunity to provide crisis intervention services to our community at the Treatment and Recovery Center. This will provide community members of all ages access to crisis care when they experience serious mental illness, substance use disorders, and addiction. I had prepared a little bit more, but there was some misunderstanding or miscommunication between Sarah and I with respect to what I was going to present. And so at this point, what I will do is stand back and answer questions as Sarah has suggested.
Yeah, obviously that's a decision of the commission. It's a miscommunication on our part. So if the commissioners would like to continue to hear more from Patrick, that's certainly their opportunity.
I'm fine hearing more, Commissioner. Yeah, Patrick,
Go ahead,
just,
Patrick.
do you know how long we had a really long session quite a while ago? I mean, is
Do
it
you want to take a break?
No, is it
No, I'm just kidding.
20 minutes or is it?
I honestly,
Yeah.
I know, per agreement with Sarah previously, or what I thought was agreement, was I was going to do a high level overview on
Great.
some of the issues that they had brought up and kind of where we're at. I was not going to go into deep detail because county staff have to vet it. They have to understand it. It has to make sense. So I don't want to go.
I think that's
And
fine.
again, we've agreed we're not going to debate here in the community or at a community meeting. And so that's, you know, my hope was not to spend the next 3.5 hours like we did a month ago doing that.
Checking everybody is smiling out in the audience. They're
Right,
happy
right.
about
And
that.
it is my intent that I am the only one having to present. If I need to call somebody up, I will, but the intent will be a high level overview. If there are questions I cannot answer or maybe should not answer because I'm not qualified to do that, we'll write it down and get an answer back on those things. So.
That sounds great.
Great.
Go for
Okay. So the Burt Nash Center, and I appreciate Brooke clarifying that the county is asking for a plus. Because as the Burt Nash Center sees itself and its ability to partner with the county on this project, we look according to established industry standards set out and published by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, the Kansas Department of Aging and Disability Services, specifically around our CMHC license, our CBHC certification, and now a private psychiatric hospital license. The Kansas Department of Health and Environment, who administers Medicaid for Kansas, the Commission on the Accreditation of Rehabilitation Facilities, and numerous national health insurance entities. The Burt Nash Center stands ready based on those criteria and expectations. We would like to offer, hold on, I got to get some things now that you've said, you want me to go some direction. So let me, before I dive into any particular area from that list that Sarah showed, are there any particular areas you have an interest in me addressing? And if we have addressed those and submitted to the county, I'm happy to cover those as one of you suggested. I can't remember which one of you. We have said in some of our responses, hey, let's get together and talk through these. And if that's the case, I won't go down those. So is there any particular area you have an interest in?
Because we would probably identify those kind of, as we've heard your presentation, I heard from the public, and I think we will have things we'd like to ask you, and we may be able to pull up that list if that's a good guiding document.
It
for
might
that
be a good
discussion.
guiding, yes. I mean, that's, again, so I'm not sure, because I don't want to go too far and violate time kind of issues or constraints.
We put up that list, Sarah. And maybe, Patrick, just a question is, I heard Sarah say that you all had talked about that timeline, that it's aggressive, but Burt Nash feels like it's an appropriate timeline.
Based on our internal analysis, we are ready to begin providing the services that could be and should be provided at the TRC. So in terms of, can we get through all of this other stuff within that time frame? I am committed to working absolutely towards that, as is my team. But honestly, we're not sure what kind of responses we're going to get back, what kind of additional requests we're going to. That is the difficulty with the plus part of the equation. Typically, we are given a standard, a code, a manual that says, here's what you need to do, and you work towards that. So you kind of have a goalpost, right? The plus, with it not being defined, is a real challenge. And I appreciate the question regarding frustration and challenges. Yeah, how do you meet a standard that isn't known or isn't published? So that is creating a challenge. And so I won't be able to guarantee that that timeline can be achieved. What I will say is we stand ready to do that now and to do the work towards meeting whatever that plus requirement is. I hope that helps answer your question.
I think I can maybe offer one clarification, and feel free, Brooke, to let me know if I've interpreted this wrongly, but it was licensing plus. So there are other things besides the many licensing issues that you talked about, not issues, but the licensing that you hold. But things like a budget. A budget is not evaluated by anything that would give you a license, but that is something that the county, of course, would require and that you would want us to require. So that I think that plus is not necessarily just that. The plus means that the county is asking for something that shouldn't be asked for, is unreasonable, or is outside of the scope. I just think it's part of the reasonableness of what we do here.
I'm not going to argue with you about reasonableness or the extent of it. It's at what point do you meet a standard that isn't set, that isn't, I agree. If they're going to provide us funding, they need a budget, and we have submitted multiple budgets to the county, including a 2023 budget and a 2024 budget in late December. So we have submitted much of this stuff. And so we're just waiting to hear whether what we have submitted, and at what point what we have submitted satisfies the plus part of this agreement.
And I
Or
think that
getting
is
there.
the due diligence process that we're involved in.
Right.
The back and forth.
Right.
Including all the things on this list, only one of which or so is licensing.
Correct. Right.
Commissioners,
But much of this fits within licensing expectations.
so to that end, Patrick, Commissioners, I wonder if instead of necessarily pulling off some of these from the list, to start with, I'd like to hear from you, Patrick, since we're having so much conversation about the plus standards or expectations, actually is what I would say. There are expectations that we have that are different from regulations that you are responsible to based on your licensure. Can you be more specific and identify what your team perceives as the plus, since we're using that terminology, the things that you're talking about, maybe an unknown standard to meet,
Sure.
and that those are things you're thinking through. So can you be more
Sure,
specific
sure.
about some
So
examples?
last week, I signed an agreement with Douglas County for approximately $4 to $5 million for operations support of a lot of different services. At no time have we been ever asked to provide job descriptions for our billing staff. That was required for this. One would wonder why in one contract agreement worth $4 to $5 million, you don't have to provide that level of detail. But the organization that the county has been working with for decades for this project, we suddenly have to provide that kind of detail. So that would be a plus. I would wonder, why do we have to go to that detail when we are a known entity? We have had contracts with the county for decades.
But what the expectation of what the TRC will provide are new services to
They
the
are not-
community, that they go beyond the services that you currently provide and that we currently have agreements around funding for. So I don't
Correct, but the
know that
work-
it's right to lump those in
But
together.
the work, well, I'm just giving you an example. You asked for an example of what seems different about this project, and that seems different. Because that has not been required before, and I hope I'm not setting a precedent that now you're going to expect that for every contract moving forward. You asked for an example of what seems like a plus that is unusual to us. That would be a plus that seems unusual, especially since, again, the Burt Nash Center is a known entity to Douglas County.
I appreciate that example. Are there any others that
I'm
stand
not
out?
gonna, I'll be honest with you, I don't think this is the appropriate venue to have a debate about all of those things. I think that is something that this group here, when we meet, should have a conversation about.
Well, actually, I tend to disagree with you on that, Patrick, because
That's fine.
you're projecting that the county is being, and this is why I asked the question of Brooke earlier. You're projecting that the county is being overly zealous in the expectations it has. And I'm trying to understand what Burt Nash, if Burt Nash is expecting that there will be no plus when it comes to the TRC, and wants to project that plus is too much and we may not be able to hit that deadline. I think it's important to clarify that now. I think that's really what I'm trying to get at is, if it's too much, we need to hear that, and we need to hear specifics about what's too much. Because I think that's some of the frustration that I hear from the community, is that why isn't this open yet? Why isn't this open? Burt Nash says they can open tomorrow. And we're saying there's some expectations that the community has put on this center that I'm not quite sure Burt Nash is ready to provide yet, because they're telling us it's a plus. So I guess that's where I think this is a totally appropriate conversation.
Okay, well, the characterization of overzealousness is yours, not mine. So I'm not going to agree to that. And if there is a belief that we thought there wouldn't be a plus, that is not at all our understanding. We already do a tremendous amount of plus with Douglas County. We provide data to them that I think no other agency provides. We have worked with them diligently over the last several years to craft funding agreements that are significantly different than any other community partner. We have partnered with them on the development of those. We have agreed to those, and they have started to use those as a model for other agreements with other community partners. So we have never been afraid of pluses.
I just have to interrupt you a little bit, Patrick.
Mhm.
We have those community partner agreements with a number of community partners. First one was with DECA, second one was with Burt Nash. So we do use them in about a dozen of our community partners but you do provide great data as a part of that process. And that is the model the county has been moving towards with those types of
Right.
agreements.
I am basing it off of what I have been told by county staff is that we have helped craft and develop
Absolutely.
some of the initial versions and agreements around that. So
But it's not the only one.
no, and I'm not saying it was the only one. If Lori was first, great. But I think we were right there along with you and helping create what we believe is a very reasonable, very good agreement because we agree with data, we agree with outcomes, we agree with accountability, and at no point throughout this project has Burt Nash or any of our partners ever asked to not be accountable. We've said from the very beginning, whatever agreement we come to, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years down the road, we expect accountability measures, performance standards, expectations to be clearly illustrated in that document. So we have never asked for an easy pass. We have never held ourselves to a low standard. I think that is pretty evident in the amount of accomplishments we've made in the last 3 to 4 years. We don't hold ourselves as, hey, this is good enough. We are constantly looking, how do we improve? How do we capture data? How do we get input from the community, from our partners, so that we can continue to improve? We hold ourselves to an incredibly high standard, and we put ourselves out there to meet even higher standards, even when we're not required to. No one required us to become CARF accredited. We made that choice to go to a national standard. So we don't ask for an easy pass.
So do you, when you look at that, I want to make sure I understand about the timeline, because that's the thing
So let me, as I said earlier, we are committed to hitting that timeline based on what we know today. We don't know what new documents, new requests, new feedback we will get, new expectations from the county that we will get. One of the documents they didn't mention is they gave us that the subsequent, and not that you were trying to hide it, subsequent document regarding our policies, some feedback on policies. And if you mentioned it, I don't remember, but it's not a big deal. I'm just saying, so when we respond to those and others, and depending on what we get back, might determine how much time it takes us to get some of those, but we are committed to hitting this timeline. We want this thing open as much as you. You're getting a tremendous amount of feedback. I can't go anywhere without somebody asking me, when is this thing going to open? Why isn't this opening? So it's not just you guys getting that. It's everyone in the leadership team who gets this. It's every one of my board members who get that question regularly.
And so if there were concerns, that could be shared at the March update, right? That would be.
I would hope that, I mean, publicly, yes. My hope is we're working through all of those things. And I appreciate Sarah saying this might take multiple meetings a week, and we are committed to those. And I'm pleased to hear that the county staff is committed to making those possible in their calendars, which I know are incredibly busy, going to get even more so as you move into budgeting. But I'm glad to hear that they are committed to doing that work as well, because I have an entire team ready to go.
Yeah, because I think Patrick asked us if there were specific things on the list that we wanted him to address.
I'm happy to kick us off with, I'll just renew some questions from our December 14th discussion and start first with the bottom of that list and ask you to explain where's Burt Nash at with the planning for and process of law enforcement and EMS engagement. Specifically, we talked a lot about, and we've heard a lot of community concerns about whether or not that the TRC, once open, will serve as an alternative place for law enforcement to take somebody who is in behavioral health crisis and is maybe picked up for various misdemeanors that sometimes people get picked up for and put into jail or taken to the emergency room. The TRC is meant to act as an alternative location. So I'm just curious to understand where the progress of that issue is in terms of if awarded an operating agreement and a lease, what is your plan for them to drop folks off, and what has been your communication with various law enforcement and first responders in the community so far?
So I'll do a very brief answer, and thankfully my documents show this is one of those issues that we've asked for a conversation with Douglas County on, because there are a couple of different proposals sitting out there with regards to phased opening and what will be allowed at that, what we will do at those various phases. And so I'm not really prepared to answer that specifically. I will say previously, Bert Nash, BHP, let's just say the TRC leadership team have engaged law enforcement and fire med on numerous conversations about that. And I think at this moment, we're kind of in a holding pattern to further conversations until we have some more specifics in terms of timing and the actual phased in that ends up being agreed to between the two entities, Bert Nash and the county. Would that be fair, Sarah?
I would say it's fair that I think we haven't clarified all the points on the staffing plan, but I think the commissioner's question related to policy developments and how those kinds of things, training, particularly now as we're moving into conversations about opening dates.
We have a training manual. I think when we were here in December, Jesse Belt discussed what that was. I think it was you, Jesse, or maybe it was Trish. We discussed what that manual looked like and some of the process. But what we've also heard from law enforcement is we do not want you to train them months and months in advance of opening this. Let's begin that training when we have a date, because then our officers, our fire med folks can say, okay, as of X date, this is when we're going to do this. Don't train us months in advance of something that isn't open. And that's a partnership. We're hearing them, we're listening to them, and we're working with them, and they are waiting. When I talked to one of the law enforcement department leaders, they said, we are waiting to hear more so we can help move this forward together.
I'll ask one, and I don't expect that this is all worked out. I just was curious on a potential advisory council, or do you have thoughts or visions for what would work well for our community, for transparency, for oversight, or community feedback? Do you have?
Yeah,
things you'd
well,
like to
again,
share?
community feedback, if you're talking about community feedback on Bert Nash and any of our operations, we have an established system for
mean,
that and
just the
multiple.
TRC.
But well, TRC would be included in that direct to Bert Nash. In terms of the advisory councils or committee, Sarah and I've had a couple of just very high level conversations about that. I am absolutely in support of it, and I think we need that. I don't know that it should be solely focused on the TRC. I think the county invests significantly across the behavioral health field here. And therefore, I think our consumers need to have an opportunity to weigh in all of those areas. So I would suggest that we look at an advisory council that has the width and breadth to look at all services provided in our county with respect to behavioral health. So I'm absolutely in favor of it.
You mentioned consumers specifically. Is that?
I think consumers have to be on that. People with lived experience, people who support people with lived experience. should be a part of that, should be a significant part of that. Should I say it's absolutely exclusive to them? I think those are things that Sarah and I and you all and the community will weigh in. So I don't have the perfect answer on it, and I don't want to profess to. What I will say is I'm 100% in support of creating greater opportunities for consumers, their loved ones, to provide specific focused feedback on the system of care.
Thank you.
Yes.
Can you give us an update about leadership team?
Sure.
And specifically medical director, executive director?
Yeah, that's again, so this is one that it somewhat confounds me, because I know in December and I know early on, we said that the TRC would have a dedicated medical director. We have never proposed otherwise. I know there may have been some confusion as to how we allocated the cost of that medical professional. About 1/3 of their costs would be covered as administrative and therefore a non-clinical piece, but about 66% of their time would be allocated to direct provision of care or the oversight of that care. But we do intend to have a full-time medical director at the TRC. That is their sole focus. They will not be doing other things.
How about executive director? That was something we talked about a while
Well,
ago.
so as we covered, the TRC will not have its own executive director. The TRC will be led by the director of TRC operations, who will have senior leadership ability like all other Burt Nash senior leaders have, executive leaders. They will have the ability to hire and fire. They have the ability to enter into contracts and agreements. They have the ability to lead their program. That is how I practice all other departments at Burt Nash. And so that's what will happen over at the TRC. And that will be in partnership, of course, with the medical director.
Richard, can you talk a little bit, when we were here in December, we talked about a phasing plan and when the TRC could be open 24/7, when we could take those real high acuity clients that may come in. Has that evolved anymore, or is it still where we were in December?
That would be one of those issues that we have asked to sit down with the county for conversation, because again, what we presented is what we presented, and what we received back from the due diligence was something different. And so we're trying to figure out what that means, how to best roll that out. We want to do this in partnership and in collaboration with the county. We are not trying to do this to the county. We are trying to do this with the county and with the community's best interest in mind.
Mr. Chair, I have quite a few other questions, but I would rather hold them until after we'd heard from the public for public comment. I just throw that out for a suggestion.
Yeah, that sounds good. I think unless you have anything else for us, Patrick, I think we'll,
Nope,
looks like we have lots of public here who want to come talk to us. So
thank you.
thank you. Okay, we'll open this up for public comment. If you'd like to provide public comment on this, if there's a sign-in sheet there, you can sign in after you provide your public comment. You don't have to do it before. But if you'd like to provide public comment, you'll have 3 minutes. Come on down.
One of the things that I'm concerned about.
Can you give
is-
us your name?
Oh, Sherilyn Wells.
Thanks, Cheryl.
One of the things that I'm concerned about is that I have heard, in fact, I've met someone that I believe has been banned from Burt Nash services. And I just would like to know how you are going to run the treatment and recovery center if you have banned clients from Burt Nash services. Now, nobody wants people to be unsafe, but I'm concerned, are these people that you're banning? Are they unsafe or are they aggravating? I realize it's a different kind of situation, but I volunteer at DARE. Lauren Henderson, I know it's very different. He never bans anyone. I volunteer with a little peer group. We do not ban people. We might ask them to leave. And I am very concerned that the people with the deepest needs will be able to use the treatment and recovery center, because I thought also the idea was that these people would be kept out of jail and not arrested and sent to jail. I understand that there's trespassing, and I also have heard that Bert Nash has had some people arrested off of their own property. No, I understand we don't want people to be unsafe, but you know, these people are out in the community and somehow they're negotiating through the community, but somehow they can't be let into this center. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a reminder, as we take the next public comment, come on up, Rick. Please address your comments to the commission. Yep. We may ask some of those same questions, but yeah.
Commissioners, my name is Rick Kagan and live here in Lawrence, member of Justice Matters. There's a number of our members who are here this evening, continuing to track and interest in the process regarding the TRC. I find the discussion very interesting about the plus standards and your questions related to those. I think that conversation is somewhat encouraging. And I think with some of your questions tonight to Patrick Schmitz, I think you've begun to address some of our continuing concerns about the role of the medical director and the leadership of the Treatment and Recovery Center. I think those are important things to continue to hammer out. I would say that so far, I don't know that I mean, there's a long list of things in the slides, which I haven't had a chance to study. Will be interesting to get a copy of those. But we want to make sure that the Treatment and Recovery Center is fully equipped, staffing wise, on a 24/7 basis to be that key alternative to crisis cases that might ordinarily go elsewhere, including to the emergency department and LMH. So still more information is needed about what staffing is necessary to kind of meet those expectations. And as the previous individual spoke, not turning anyone away. It really needs to be guaranteed access for everyone who shows up. The discussion about the advisory council, I think, is kind of put that in the context of shared governance. That's important. I see I've got the 1 minute warning here. So one thing that we want to continue to hear from the county about is what an outside consultant role might be and who that might be. We'd also like to see the county consider an independent external program review as the TRC gets up and running. So this would be a relationship between the county and a contractor of your choosing. So given the limitations on time, I will stand down now, but I think we're interested to see more of a timeline that you're projecting. I hope everyone is able to kind of meet those deadlines. We look forward to that. Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Suzanne Valdez, and I'm honored to serve as Douglas County District Attorney. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you tonight. I stand before you with full appreciation that it is the purview of this commission, and certainly not my office, to decide when and under what conditions to open the Treatment and Recovery Center. I have observed a community mental health crisis center functioning, like the TRC is supposed to work. I've seen that in operation. Last spring, I had the privilege to personally tour the Connections Crisis Response Center in Phoenix with Commissioner Reed and Bob Triansky. And we saw this operation work, and it was amazing to see. It's a center where community members who are in mental health or substance abuse crisis can present themselves for immediate psychiatric care and medical care with the help of law enforcement when necessary, with the hope that the person can be stabilized and remain safely in our community. Tonight, I want to stress the urgency in getting our TRC functional and operational immediately for the citizens of Douglas County. These concerns are threefold. First, public safety is a top priority of my office. The mental health of our citizenry is often interconnected with crime, in that mentally ill persons may commit offenses upon others, including businesses. Some of this crime is violent crimes against individuals. Also, there are mentally ill persons who have yet committed a crime, but who may be a danger to themselves or others in the community. To put it simply, those in mental health crisis will benefit from triage services that the TRC is designed and was built to provide. Hopefully, the services will prevent criminal activity for which the criminal justice system would likely have to address and has to address at present. And our jail will not have to accommodate these persons. Most importantly, we will have mentally ill persons who have been stabilized once they have received proper care and services and can remain safely in our community. On Monday, February 6th, I received statistics from the presentation made by KDADS to the Kansas Senate Public Health and Welfare Committee on the status of forensic competency. This report indicates that as of December 2022, there are 163 inmates in county jails awaiting competency evaluations. The average wait in a county jail for a competency evaluation, and these are for felony crimes, at Larned State Hospital for males is 377 days. For females, it's 56 days. As of February 6th, I want to inform the commission that I work very closely with the jail, and Major Bunting there provides us weekly updates on the inmates who are there on Douglas County cases. And I know every single one of those individuals who's in the jail. And I will say that we are running, it's a difficult situation. But there are a total of 11 inmates in the Douglas County Jail awaiting either a competency evaluation at Larned or at Osawatomie.
Dave, that we're out of time.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
There's lots, if I could just have a couple more minutes, I would ask just.
We have a
couple more
lot
points.
of people, I think, who want to
Okay.
speak, so thank you.
I hope that you get it moving quickly because we need it. Thank you.
We may always have further questions for anybody who makes public comment.
Any other public comment?
Hi there, I'm Mark Bueller. Thank you three for doing what you're doing. I have lots to say, but in light of what you do tonight, I'll not. I've sat in your chair. My greatest disappointment is noticing that all the communication looks to be by Zoom. And I know it's a new world and I need to get in it, but you can get so much more done looking across the table from somebody that disappoints me a lot. So I hope the deadlines are acceptable to everybody and you get something done. Thanks.
Yeah. There's one that says TRC on it. Yeah. Anyone else for public comment?
Thank you. My name is Paula Dupenny Lee,
And I'll keep this very short, but I have 40+ years of being a psychiatric mental health nurse. 30 years at the Menninger Clinic and over 10 years at LMH, both when it had a unit. And I had the privilege of being the sole psychiatric nurse that saw patients wherever they happened to be in the hospital. We had social workers and emergency staff to take care of the emergency department, but we did not ignore the patients who were already in the hospital and still needed to be seen. So in light of that, what the list that I have seen, I would just like to say, and I know that it's extremely important to the community, it's very important to me that the TRC be very successful. But I see that list. I have opened crisis units in the past. I've opened senior units in the past. And I've worked in outpatient settings as well as just on a general psych unit. So I would say take the time that is needed to make it work. And I realize that by putting a March deadline on it or an April deadline, whatever, I don't care if it's next year, I wouldn't like to see that. But if that's what it takes to have a successful mental health service that covers the entirety of our community, I think that our due diligence and your due diligence is more important than any timeline to meet. Thank you.
Members of the Douglas County Commission, my name is Matthew Herbert. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'll be brief in my comments. Approximately 6 months ago, I joined several of you in cutting a ribbon, and I joined you in the excitement of opening the TRC. But since that time, have felt that perhaps the pats on the back occurred maybe too soon. It felt like great progress was being made, and since then it's felt like we buried ourselves in the mud. A big part of a partnership involves us acting as partners with one another, and that requires a great degree of mutual respect. The mutual respect that I think Bert Nash seeks from this commission is the acknowledgement that they have been providing services to this community for longer than any of us have been alive. And as I listen to the tone of this meeting and I see the tone of the memos that are passed back and forth, I don't believe that respect is being afforded. In a lot of ways, it feels as though, while I've never sat in your seat, I've sat in a seat similar. It feels as though an out-of-town developer just showed up and has this shiny new object, and you're looking at it with great concern, as you should. But when we talk about Bert Nash and the services that they have provided this community, it concerns me that the dialogue is being put in place where they're being treated as though they're an outside entity with no proven track record. They have the opportunity to open a first-class facility in this community, the likes of which we haven't seen in this state. And as such have attracted a team of field experts to work for them. The problem is we've attracted a team of field experts that want this opportunity to truly move the needle in a progressive way for behavioral health in our community, who want this unique experience, but can't be provided any information as to when they'll actually be put to work. The ability to keep a field expert employed when you tell them we don't actually know when you'll have the opportunity to conduct your job is incredibly difficult. And every day that goes by, we put this facility's success at greater risk. So while you may believe that dragging the process out will make it more successful, I would articulate to you that quite perhaps the opposite is true. Commissioner Kale, I'll direct these to you because you and I share somewhat of a similar professional background. And I would say that as someone who came from the field of education, I would encourage you to ask your staff to be very specific with measurable objectives. A lot of what is being given are not measurable objectives. We're engaging in conversation where it's a qualitative on one side and a quantitative on the other, and that's not working. And that's why we're in the position we're at now. We need to both be on the same ground.
I think Patrick Schmitz articulated very well that he is willing to meet the standards. He's met the federal standards, he's met the state standards. That's why it's a licensed facility. The ask of the county is that while you're more than welcome to present these challenges, that once the challenges are met, to perhaps not move the goalpost further. That's how we can make this happen. And that's how we can get to where we're not a year or two after a ribbon cutting before we're open. Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. Oh, I'm short, sorry. Kirsten Kuhn, you all know me. I'm not going to be as eloquent as some previous speakers and didn't intend to speak at all, but I will take this opportunity to say I second everything the previous commenter said. Bert Nash stands ready to open this facility. They are accredited, they have the expertise, and it's not as though the Crisis Center, while it is a new entity within our community, it is not new to the world. It is not new to our country as a whole, and the expertise is there. Bert Nash is ready. Thank you.
Any other public comment? Okay, we'll turn to online public comment. Oh, we do
Online.
have,
Oh.
don't be shy. Come on up.
Slightly, my name is Gene Dorsey. I live in Lawrence, slightly different topic, but I went over to the budget office yesterday and looked at the behavioral health budget. I noticed you have more than $10 million in the bank, and it looks like you'll be growing that reserve at about $5 million a year unless you come up with some new programs. So I'm wondering at some future commission meeting, if you could explain how you plan to spend all of that money that you're collecting from the taxpayers. Thank you.
Thank you. Last call in the courthouse. Okay, we're moving online.
Move Cindy into the panel. Cindy, you need to accept the button to become a panelist and we'll move you into the panel. There we go. Nope, Cindy took her hand down. I don't have any hands raised online.
Okay. Give it just a second. Nobody? Okay. All right, bring it back to the commission for any discussion or further questions.
I had a question for our DA if she's willing to come back up. I don't know that we'll get to everything you were hoping for, but so my question is, of the many things, many programs that will operate at the TRC, are there particular ones that are very helpful to you in your job that you definitely want to see happen there and happen well?
Well, so because both my office has deals with individuals who have been charged with crimes and then need to have an evaluation. You know, if we can have, it's just really prevention, really. If anyone can just show up for triage services, get the help that they need, wraparound services, whether it's immediate, psychiatric, it's longer, 72 hours, whatever. The research has shown that stabilization of an individual will prevent crime. So it's just having that drop-in center that's very important. And then those who are in crisis, so it'll prevent crime. And it'll also, those who may be a danger to themselves or others who are also under our jurisdiction to care for, it'll prevent, decrease the care and treatment proceedings that we do file on behalf of individuals.
You mentioned in your earlier comments about competency and the long wait times to get those competency evaluations. Is that something that happens in our community now? And is that something that would be different once the TRC is open?
So that's a very good question. When we talk about Larned, that's the state hospital. It's the only state hospital in Kansas where anyone who's charged with a felony crime and their competency is problematic or questioned, and the court determines that a competency evaluation needs to be determined before this person can stand trial. Then that's the waiting period that I talked about. So it's a very long time. And in the meantime, what happens is these individuals stay in jail. So they become basically mental health facilities, which the jails are not equipped to do.
And so that can only happen at Larned? So is that something?
Those are
that
for
doesn't happen-
felony, serious felony crimes. We do have Osawatomie where we send our care and treatment individuals, those who are a danger to themselves or others, but have not yet committed a crime. And then we do send them there if for any misdemeanor evaluations or any other competency. But for serious violent crime where there's a felony charge, those all go to Larned. And right now we've got over a year wait for those individuals who have not been received and reviewed yet for competency.
Maybe just putting you on the spot, but can you talk at all about like the 72-hour stabilization, possibly involuntary hold? What impact that would have if law enforcement or hospital are able to bring someone to the TRC for that before they would?
To see it in practice, Commissioner Reed and I and Bob Tryansky went to see the TRC as it was operating in Phoenix. It's a much bigger center for Maricopa County. But when I arrived the morning for our tour and time with the director there, I saw 2 law enforcement agencies, one from, I think, Mesa Police Department, the other from Phoenix PD. They literally just drive up. They take the individual out, the center comes out, provides their care to take that individual. The law enforcement officer then basically goes to get to the restroom, grabs a donut. They do have donuts for police officers there, and it gets back in the car and goes back to do public safety. So it's really not, and they are very compassionate and they're trained. I think that's what Patrick Schmitz was talking about, training law enforcement. Right now we're putting a lot of burden on our law enforcement agencies to provide that kind of care when they're not really trained to do it, and they have weapons and all those things that can go wrong when there's that kind of encounter. So it actually, as we saw it, there's 3 phases. There's a phase where you go in and people just really need meds. They're kind of in crisis. They're not sure what to do. And they can get people out stabilized fairly quickly, give them a meal. They go back out into the community. There's a more intensive intermediate, if you will, program. And then there's a psychiatric care. And those individuals are really in mental health crisis and are very, very at a point where they can hurt themselves or hurt others in the community and cause violent crime. So I'm really proud of our center. I just want to wrap up by saying that we have this center and it's something that we've been talking about at the national level, at the National DA's Conference, where the federal government and the legislators are talking about seed money to start these centers. I got the opportunity to explain what one was, and people were just amazed about it. And I said, and we have one. They said, can we come tour it and see it? And I said, that'd be great when it's open. That's the reason why I'm here today, to urge you to do it. And that's all I would like to say, unless you have any other further questions.
Thank you.
Sure.
Other questions, comments?
Yes, I do want to invite Patrick Schmitz back up to be able to ask some more questions. Some topics got brought up during public comment that were questions I had previously, so I just want to circle back and revisit those. So Patrick, can you talk a little bit about maybe what the current Bert Nash policy or procedures are for the discontinuation of services? And this is a topic that's come up through a few public comments here in our public meetings. I've also had many individual conversations with folks in the community, both in recent months, but also over the years as a service provider in this community, about people sometimes being banned from services. So since we're hearing about it so much, I want to understand what that policy is, and I want to understand, you know, I guess the status quo of it, and if you were talking about any changes to that or how it will translate to the TRC, which is intended to be 24/7 for all people.
Right. Thank you for the opportunity. And I appreciate the earlier comment about it, because I've had multiple conversations as well over the last couple of months on that very topic. Currently, the Bert Nash Center does not have any members of our community banned from our services. We do have a policy on appropriateness of behavior and how people can treat others. Probably very much like the county has what's appropriate, what's not allowed in a county building or a county facility versus what is their most intense level of care that would accept everybody, and that being the jail. The TRC is designed to take everybody that is clinically appropriate to be seen. It will not have a ban list. If you are in mental health or substance abuse crisis and you are medically appropriate, determined by a physician to be appropriate for admission to the TRC, you will be admitted to the TRC, regardless of your status at an outpatient basis or anything else. Yes, we have had clients who have destroyed waiting rooms or destroyed an office, and they were asked to leave. They were offered services in a different format or a different capacity, but we have not banned them. We understand and accept the fact that we are here to work with everybody. That does require some mutuality of how you behave and how you act, but we expect that the clients we serve are going to be facing significant challenges in their life, and therefore sometimes how they manifest those, how they deal with those are not the normal, not what normally would be accepted in the community. But we do not have a ban list, and we do not intend to turn people away at the TRC. We expect them to come in hot and upset and struggling, and we welcome them.
I appreciate that. Just to make sure I'm clear, because I want to be able to respond to folks who have asked this question of me directly. Currently, you're saying you do not have a ban list. Is that new? Is that because of, I mean, has that changed with going to CCBHC? Is that not something that's been in place before and that you're explaining has maybe been misunderstood by folks who went there for services and received the message that they were not allowed to come back and continue services?
What I'm aware of is we do not have a ban list at this time. Whether that has changed, I'm not sure. I guess I could look over at Amy and the team to see. I'm seeing a shaking of the head.
And I just want to, and to add on to that, we also heard in that same comment, and again, it's come up in conversations, including a recent Public Justice Matters meeting at the public library, about no trespass orders sometimes being issued for folks in the building. Can you speak to that?
I'm looking over Stephen. I'll have Stephen come up.
Stephen O'Neill, Chief Operations Officer, Burton Ash. Patrick is correct. We don't turn anyone away from service. I do want to clarify, just like you would go to any medical professional, it's not a menu where you can just order what you want and the professional's going to give it to you. I want to be very, very clear on that. There are times where we have to tell people that a service is not medically necessary or appropriate. That happens with the prescription of certain medications. That happens with the provision of certain outpatient therapies. Typically, I'm not aware of a no trespass order recently. We have contemplated one recently because someone was showing up at our staff member's house. Those are issues that we have to take very, very seriously. But even in that instance, we did not deny care. In fact, we actually referred them to a more intensive level of care, figuring that we could wrap more services around them in the community. So I've been at Burton Ash almost 5 years, and in that time, we have not denied service to anyone. That is different from us giving them exactly the service that they're asking for. And that's where the balance between the medical professional and client self-determination and choice comes in. As a licensed provider, I have an ethical obligation not to provide treatment that is not going to be effective or may make things worse. And as an administrator, I've got an obligation, and Patrick has an obligation to protect our staff and our other clients. But I am not aware that we've banned anyone or discontinued anyone from services. I imagine if we had, we can't do that. That's not something that we do. If there are specific individuals, I would encourage them. You could have them reach out to myself or Amy Finkeldye, our Senior Director of Quality Improvement, so that we can get more detail on the individual circumstance. It can be very frustrating to want something that we can't offer. And I know that, and I want to own that. But we do the best we can to serve everyone in the best way we can. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stephen, if you don't go too far, and either one of you can answer this. Do you provide services to anyone with mental health or behavioral health needs within the jail?
Commissioner, we have what we call the forensic team that is housed at Douglas County Jail. That is 4 professionals who are there every day, not every day, every day of the week, not on the weekends, and they are there to do assessments and conduct interventions and help individuals who are incarcerated, as well as help plan for their discharge or their release and how to get them prepared. So we do have a team there, and they are available 24/7 if there is a crisis to help support the team and do a screening if necessary. So that jail team has been in place for, just say, a decade. I mean, a long time. It was well in advance, well here before I came here, and I'm almost on my 6th year. I am in my almost to 6 years. So it's been around for quite some time.
So all people within the jail that have a mental health or behavioral health concern are, when they're treated through Burt Nash.
Treated through Burt Nash. And again, even though they are incarcerated at the jail, clearly against their desire, there are certain limitations of what we can force on them in terms of treatment. So those that are willing to be served and helped, we are there to do that. There are certainly some that refuse any type of mental health intervention. And so we can't force that on them. That's just not legally allowed at this time.
You mentioned about if we had names in the community that we could bring those to you, but there's also a privacy concern. How would that work if we had people by name that we wanted to check and see what their status might be?
Well, you're right. We would not be able to have you give us that list and us answer you that list. What I think Stephen's suggestion was, if those individuals are concerned about their status, or if they have a concern, that they should reach out to Amy or Stephen to check that, because then we could deal directly with them on that matter.
Appreciate the clarification.
Yes. Yeah.
So we've been, I sort of brought this up during our last discussion. So I'm just going to kind of frame it the same way again. We spent a lot of time talking primarily about mental health crisis and folks being a danger to themselves or others based on that potential crisis. Part of the vision for the TRC is also that this is a place that integrates both behavioral health, mental health concerns and crisis, along with substance use crisis. So can you speak a little bit about the status of what you intend to have in the TRC in terms of operations related to detox, medical assisted treatment? Also, any update that you can give us about working with DECA to provide peer support in the TRC?
Sure. So let me just read directly from the TRC program description. The purpose of the Treatment and Recovery Center is to provide crisis outpatient and crisis residential treatment services for people experiencing an acute psychiatric, substance use, or co-occurring disorder crisis according to the needs of the individual. The TRC functions as an access point for services, or to services for people in need of urgent behavioral health care and stabilization in Douglas County, Kansas. The TRC facility houses 3 separate services provided to the community: access center, observation unit, and stabilization. The Access Center provides community members with immediate access to behavioral health crisis assessment and treatment. The assessment is led by mental health professionals who will work with you to get a treatment plan in place. Treatment plans are unique to each person. These plans may include crisis observation and stabilization programs or being connected with other community resources. This is similar to what DA Valdez talked about at the facility in Arizona. When we toured that facility approximately 4 years ago, we saw what they called the clinic, and we looked at it and we said, you know what, that's where our access center needs to go. That's where the current Burt Nash Center Access Center needs to go. It needs to be located with the rest of the crisis services. And so we had an opportunity early in the design of the building to ensure that access could be there. Vast majority of people who are served in that building will come in, be assessed, start some type of treatment, and leave the very same day with a plan of action and follow-up care. So that's the Access Center. Crisis Observation Unit provides a 23-hour observation of adults 18 and over. This will assess and treat and stabilize most crises in a short amount of time to get you back to everyday life with your family, your friends, and work. This could then entail outpatient therapy services, medication management in a safe and therapeutic environment. And the question about will it offer medication-assisted treatment or how to help somebody who might need some medication to help either with their mental health or substance use crisis? Absolutely, that will be available in this unit. We take seriously our opportunity in a CIC, Crisis Intervention Center, to treat the whole person, whether they have a mental health, substance use, or co-occurring challenge facing them. Then the stabilization unit will provide longer periods of time for those experiencing a severe mental health or substance use crisis. It's a safe, structured place for care coordination, treatment, and support. And again, it will treat people who are in a mental health crisis, a substance use crisis, or co-occurring. DECA. We are continuing our conversation with DECA around their role in the environment. Lori and I met yesterday, and we are working through some of the particulars of what that could look like. So that's the best I can say at this point. We are still working with them and how best to incorporate DECA peer services. We absolutely are committed to peers being a part of it. That was another component that we saw in Arizona, the importance of peers in that type of facility. Now, Burt Nash has had a peer program for a significant number of years. It is not a new thing for us. Peer services were available at Burt Nash well before I came there almost 6 years ago. So we believe in peers. We believe in that lived experience. We believe that they bring their strength, hope, and experience to the treatment team. And so we value peers, and we will have peers at the TRC.
Thank you. I just want to take the opportunity to, for whatever it's worth to you, Patrick, to express that I think that there is significant value in really trying to pursue a partnership with DECA in that space, and really appreciating what having DECA peers and that direct link to outpatient DECA services can look like alongside of Burt Nash direct linkage to those outpatient services behind the TRC. So I know that agreement is between you two to work out, but I just want to press upon you that I think that that's a significant value that I have.
And we are aligned in that value.
That's good to hear. So I'm Patrick, I'm looking for a little advice here. And I appreciate what Brooke said earlier about, typically these are negotiations that happen, and I'm going to guess, Brooke, that they're not public negotiations, right? And I think we're in sort of a unique situation in this space. And I'm thinking a lot about what Matt Herbert was saying, like how do we show trust in a public space and yet negotiate? And there can be tension around those negotiations. And I'm interested to hear from you, Patrick. What's the best way to communicate when we feel like, boy, you're asking a lot, and yet understanding that there's expectations from the community that this goes well, so I mean, that's a real challenge just to me, being really vulnerable as a commissioner, that there are certain expectations we have, and this is a unique partnership that I don't know that, at least that's the way I feel. We don't have a lot in this relationship, a lot like this relationship across the county. We have some that are close, but oftentimes they're county agencies is what they are. And this is unique in that we're working with another partner who has its own board, who has its own way of influencing the public. And I'm looking for, because I think it will be helpful to me as a commissioner, for like, how do we have a good dialogue about where our thresholds of pain are when it comes to negotiations that doesn't turn into a public feeling of distrust? I will just say maybe a comment, and this is like the world's longest question, so I'm sorry. But we wouldn't be negotiating with Bert Nash to provide this service if we didn't have respect for the service that they provide. I think that's important that it be said. At the same time, we have certain expectations that we want to make sure happen. And I think that's true of any negotiations towards a contract that you're working towards. So I have respect for Bert Nash. I'm just wanting to make sure that, those things that are very important to us are going to be happening, and want to hear from you if there's a better way that we can communicate that level, that threshold of, gosh, this seems like a lot, without slinging arrows at each other.
So, Commissioner, I would say that Bert Nash is not unique in terms of its partner agreement with Douglas County. Douglas County has, Sarah, how many community partner agreements would you say with private not-for-profit entities here in Douglas County? We're not the only one. DECA's one, Heartland Radac, Heartland Healthcare, several others. I mean, quite a few others. You guys spend probably more in the behavioral health arena than most counties do. And
Every other county in
and
Kansas.
I've never done the math, but I know it's, you probably have, but it's right up there. It's right up there. And so that is part of the benefit of living in Douglas County, and sometimes can be the challenge, right? I mean, because we pay a lot of taxes, but we get a lot for it. And that's why I'm proud to live here in Douglas County. And as I said last time, proud to pay my taxes, even if it hurts a little bit or a lot sometimes. So we're not unique in that regard. And many of them, I would say all of if they're not-for-profit, have an independent board of directors who oversees them. So we're not entirely unique there, I would not think. In terms of the best way to communicate, for me, it's for them to pick up the phone, or us to pick up the phone and say, hey, I have a question on this material. Can we walk through it? I don't see it here. Can we find it together, as opposed to some letter, some report, something? Let's solve it sooner. Just pick up the phone and say, hey, let's do it. And Sarah and I have done that at times. Sometimes we're kind of back and forth via text or email, and we just say, you know what? Let's call each other. And that's what we end up doing. And it's also part of why Sarah and I have said, we are getting in a room together at least weekly, her and I alone, in a room and having conversations about stuff. Now that needs to happen with the team members, our team, their team, solving this stuff, getting it out of the way quickly, because that's the only way we're going to be successful in this. And that's what's going to help us rebuild trust with each other and rebuild trust to our community when they see us working towards a successful outcome.
So thank you for that. I want to follow up with Sarah a little bit. So yes, we have a lot of community partners. Would this be the highest investment we have ever made with a community partner that is not a county agency?
Yes, on a single program area.
Yeah. And so I just share that because to say it's the same thing, in my mind, to say it's the same thing as the service we provide with some of our other social service agencies, I don't think it is. I think it's bigger than that. And so there feels like there's a heavier weight there.
Right, and I'm sorry if I made it sound like it was the same. I'm saying in terms of the structure of Burton Ash is not unique to others. Yes, this is a huge commitment. Please also understand it is a huge commitment on behalf of Burton Ash. We are bringing our expertise, our licensure, our certification as a CCBHC, and the significant amount of funding that brings to this project. This needs to be a partnership with an understanding that both of us bring essential, vital elements to the success of this project. We can't do this independent of each other.
Yeah, I think that's well said. Yeah, so I just, the reason I asked that is just so that the public doesn't get the impression that this is like every other community partnership we have. As a commissioner, I feel like this is a really big partnership, right? This is a large amount of dollars. I don't know that we've built a facility that then we are going to, lease to someone to provide a service. So I just think it's important to sort of not get it confused when we talk about the type of partnerships that we're doing. This is different. Patrick and I have had some discussions about, yeah, it is very different and there are different expectations for it.
It's different and similar because again, you own the community, you co-own. I don't know exactly the terminology, the community health building that we are in, that VNA is in, and public health. So in some ways it's similar, but this is a huge new investment. I don't doubt that. It is a huge investment for this county, for the citizens. It was also a huge investment for Burton Ash as an organization who helped purchase the land that the treatment and recovery campus sit on, that we then donated towards this project. So Burton Ash has been invested in this project for a very long time. And it wants to honor that investment and be a part of this project going forward. It's as important for us for it to be successful because again, yes, you have a building. Yes, you have a tax thing that says all of this is important. We have a licensure that we have to uphold and KDADS is also expecting a significant amount from us. While they may be not represented here, they are definitely a partner in this because they're the ones who evaluated for us to have a license. They're ones who evaluated whether we could include this project into our CCBHC cost formula. And they're the ones who will provide currently and hopefully into the foreseeable future, $3.1 million for this project. So there's a huge investment on their part as well.
Do you think if the county didn't provide support for this, due to your CCBHC license, you would need to have a crisis center, right? That's what I've understood.
We are required to have these levels of care, yes.
And so is that base level of service that you're talking about, we're getting back to this plus idea, is that base level of service, you would have to provide that with KDAD's money, is that correct? I mean,
it would really depend on what we agree with KDADS. Now, KDAD's money is for a crisis intervention center as established by law in 2017. And yes, we are waiting for the regulations to actually come to public view and completion. So those $3.1 million are for the CIC and future iterations of that funding, because my understanding is the 3.1 comes from state general funds currently, while the lottery vending machine account grows and funds for the future are supposed to come from that. It's my understanding that those funds, and it's actually written in legislation, the CIC funds in the future have to go to the operation of a CIC operated by a CMHC.
right. So is it, yes, you and I are thinking the same thing. So is it reasonable to expect that that additional funds that Douglas County is putting on this may have some additional expectations that go with it. I don't think you've disagreed with that, have you?
I would hope that whatever expectations the county and Burt Nash and KDADS agree to are in alignment. So we are not collecting a tremendous amount of data for one entity that isn't expected out of another entity. And I would hope that we do that in collaboration and we capture a tremendous amount of data. You've seen our data reports, and we know under the CCBHC, we will have to capture even more. That's why my quality team grew significantly this last year, so that we are better able to capture data, analyze data, report data. We're not afraid of data. We like data. I've had that conversation with Sarah for a long time. I'm not afraid of collecting data and reporting out and doing that stuff. My hope is, again, in collaboration and conversation, we agree to a set of data that makes sense across all payers and all accrediting bodies, licensing bodies. We don't want to collect a bunch of data that only one section needs. If we come to agreement, sure, but let's come to agreement on that.
Commissioner, if I could add on a little bit, just to, I agree with what Patrick has said. There is nuance in this place in terms of the particular types of services required through CCBHC and as the CIC regulations are coming to fruition. So there's a lot of detail in that space. And then there is some, so I would say that there's not complete overlap, but there is some overlap. I would also say that I don't think this is so much an issue of the data. I think we will definitely come to agreement on the data points that we need to be collecting and monitoring. I think there is some latitude in the licensure about the scope of services provided. Licensure is often, what you can do and what you can't do, but it doesn't necessarily always create a very targeted scope of services in some areas. There's flexibility in that space. And I think that's the space where we're talking with Burt Nash. How do we define, you can take involuntary holds, but do you have to take involuntary holds? So just as an example. So I think
yeah,
that's
the
where
nuance. The nuance on that one, and that is something we're definitely working with KDADS on, and it was part of our meeting the other day, was to have a conversation about what is allowed and what is not allowed and what's permitted. Certainly at the TRC, and because it will be a CIC, and even though it is designated right now as a private psychiatric hospital, a PPH, KDADS did that so that we could do involuntary holds, so that we could initiate those while we assess somebody and determine what's the next best place for them. The question we have is, if somebody is determined to need an involuntary hold and therefore a higher level, they need involuntary treatment, let me say it that way, that they need involuntary treatment, can a crisis intervention center accept that individual on a holding pattern until we can get them into a level of care that's more appropriate for that involuntary treatment? So a scenario would be, let's say I end up in LMH Health and I've done something drastic to my physical body that requires medical care. And while I am there getting medical care, I get assessed for my mental health. And that professional says, the next best place for this, the right treatment for Patrick, is to go to an inpatient facility for care. We are trying to determine, because as my understanding, and Brooke might be able to address this given her EMTALA experience, but we've asked the state to weigh in on this. My understanding of EMTALA is if a physician or a professional determines I need inpatient care, I can't get transferred to a lower level of care. And CIC is a lower level of care, a lower intervention level than a hospital, especially a private psychiatric hospital. So that's some of the nuances we're trying to determine, and we're doing that together in conversation. What people don't often understand is this field is incredibly regulated And it isn't simple black and white. There are a lot of nuances and there's a lot of law underlying this that allows us to do some things that it doesn't allow us to and not do other things. So that's the stuff we're working through.
Yes, and I appreciate, Patrick, you went kind of far more into it than I had anticipated. I meant to use it mostly as an example of the notion of how do we define the scope of services that are of the variety of things that are allowable, and how do we define that, and how do we sort of hold folks accountable with that oversight related to that scope of services? So I just think it's an analogy to sort of explain some of the space that we're negotiating and talking through is what's really not just what is allowable, but what is exactly going to be done, what services will Bert Nash be accountable for.
And I think those are questions that we're very glad to have answers for when those are ready. And I recognize that that's not now, that is probably the next time we meet for a public hearing. Most of the questions that I have, Mr. Chair, yet are probably more healthy to be asked at that time after these kind of other negotiations have occurred. So.
I also think what's really important is, and our hope is as we move forward with those conversations, is that we don't forget the importance of the medical experts that have to be involved in these conversations. We can, as administrators, talk about stuff all day long. Our attorneys can talk about stuff all day long. But unless we include the expertise that we have available in this room, in this community, around some of the medical medical issues, we're all shooting in the dark. And so we need to recognize and honor the different expertise that different professionals bring to this process. So.
That feels like a perfect segue into a additional question I had earlier about our conversation about leadership team. I appreciate the clarification that the intent has always been that there will be a full-time medical director for the TRC. Can you talk about, are you in any sort of process of trying to recruit or figure out who that next medical director might be?
Yes. So as we presented in December, we have an interim medical director, Dr. Cord Houston, with a backup from our chief medical officer, Dr. Nana Dodson. We are also right now in the process of interviewing a full-time medical director who has specific interest in the TRC, expertise on both a medical and psychiatric capacity, as well as substance abuse treatment specific to MAT and those types of things. The exact array of services we are envisioning at the TRC.
And then I also just want to add, we heard a little bit of comment about Bert Nash's capacity to staff the TRC 24/7. And
sure,
the intent is that it's a 24-hour facility. And I specifically want to ask that in light of the last time you were here, the announcement was made that BHP, which was the partnership primarily between Bert Nash and LMH, was sort of stepping aside and letting Bert Nash pursue the license and an operating agreement with us. So a big part of LMH's involvement was that they operate a 24-hour facility. So I just want to understand sort of what's the relationship with LMH look like and how they may still be assisting you with certain things. I know we heard a lot about pharmacy last time, but is that, I guess, is the partnership with LMH in some way necessary to be able to be open 24 hours since it's not currently, Bert Nash services are not available 24/7.
Well, actually, Bert Nash is providing services 24/7, and we have for a number of decades.
Through the crisis line is what are you referring to?
We operate several residential homes here and have for a number of years. We have a partnership with Douglas County to run transitions, which has now been open, 2 years? 2 years. We have had our Bridges facility for a number of years. So 24/7 is not a new concept, nor a new challenge for Bert Nash. And as we mentioned in December, we are staffed, ready to go 24/7. KDADS would not have issued a license to BHP if that were not the case, and they would not have issued Burt Nash a license to operate a 24/7 operation if we did not demonstrate our ability to staff it and that we had current staffing. And so, as was stated earlier, last Friday, we received that PPH license, which to me recognizes our ability by state statute, state licensure to meet that need. And if you recall, our phased in plan, our original phased in plan included opening day one, 24/7.
Thank you.
I don't think we have any more questions. Thank you.
Thank you
Patrick.
for your time.
Oh, wait, maybe we do. Nope.
I just want to thank you for standing here and answering quite a few questions kind of on the fly, off the cuff. And I recognize that there's a lot of work going on, continuing conversations, and I appreciate that very much.
You're welcome. And as I offered it back in December and probably before, I'm willing to come anytime you call me. Thank you.
Okay, there's no action on this item. Commissioners, any final comments? No final comments. I just want to thank everybody for coming tonight. You know, this is I think we all want it open yesterday. I think that's fair to say. And I think we all want it open. I think I underlined earlier, ready, willing, and able. I think that's all of our desire to do. So I appreciate everybody coming and listening and weighing in. Those who provided public comment, that's really helpful as well. So with that, we'll move on to our next agenda item, which is item 3.5. And I'm just going to pause for a little bit while some people may leave. Thank you, Patrick. Okay, I'm going to make a motion for the county commission to go into executive session to consult with our county counselor, John Bullock, with Brooke Aziz, our director of behavioral health projects, Bob Tryansky, for matters that would be deemed privileged in the attorney-client relationship in order to protect the attorney-client privilege for.
Commissioners, we were hoping for 45 minutes. I would love a brief break before we start that. So if we said
So we'll take how about we take a
9,
5-minute break? Is that enough
Yeah.
time? And we'll be back at 9:40 in this space.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
I need a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We're at 9:50. Well, we want to welcome you all back. It's great to see you. We've concluded our executive session and we'll move on to appointments. Oh, there was no action taken. Let's start with appointments. Commissioners, do any of you have appointments? I don't think.
I don't think we have appointments, but I do want to mention one thing that is related to appointments that I wanted to mention on my weekly memo, and it is somewhat related to the fire district appointments that we can't fill. County has a home rule resolution that sets term limits, that no individual can serve more than 2 terms or no more than 6 years on a board.
Any board?
On that particular board. So that term limit policy is particularly coming into some difficulty with relationship to like the fire district appointment. I just want to plant that little seed in your heads. Many of you know that I have talked about updating our county code over 2023. That is in our county code. What I'd like to do is have some thoughts on how strongly you still feel that we need that term limit policy, because I think in some situations, we're going to have boards that really don't even have a quorum to vote. And so I just want to, that is really the complicating factor, particularly on the fire district. So we be prepared for some future conversations about term limits.
We got new people for Fire District 3, and I think we've got one new person possibly interested in Fire District 2, if you've had a chance to follow up.
I have not yet.
Okay, but.
We just need to
have
keep
somebody
trying, but I
interested.
will tell you, it can be still really difficult. And there's been, so I just want to prepare everyone for that.
Sarah, do you need to bring a change in that policy sooner than what you were thinking?
Not right now necessarily, just I want to plant that seed that that is the reason why in this situation. There have some folks that would be willing to serve more than 6 years. And so, and they can't because they're term limited out.
Mhm.
So.
I would say the one that bothers me is the planning commission, that 6-year limit. I think that hurts the work that's able to be done there because there's such a steep learning curve. That is one I wouldn't mind revisiting at some point.
That's all I have on appointments, commissioners.
All right, we'll move on to miscellaneous commissioners. Miscellaneous, we usually start with Sarah.
Thanks, commissioners. We do have some dates next week. We've got our quarterly judges luncheon. There's the Forward Cities E3 tour coming up. And then like the week after that, we've got our first Douglas County Employee Service Awards luncheon. I wanted to point out that there are two things attached. This memo specifically, Commissioner Kelly was asked for a letter of support related to Lawrence Douglas County Public Health's annual grant, a Medicaid match program. So that's included in your packet. And also the full packet on the public hearing for the first phase of the Crossings TIF area is in your packet. The city commission is going to conduct the public hearing on March 14th. So if we have comments, we need to get them to them in advance of that. And I can be your conduit for that process. Work sessions next week on evolving energy production and its impact on Douglas County. And then pretty full set of work sessions coming up, and then noticing that we are not going to meet on March 15th as there are 5 Wednesdays in March. So that's the date we will take off. And commissioners, that's all I have tonight.
Any miscellaneous from commissioners?
Nope.
No. Just checking calendars real quick. So we have our quarterly judges luncheon next week.
Mhm.
Yep. Okay. Well, if there's nothing else, we are adjourned.